This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate what if Fem Naruto traveled back in time to raise herself. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now, wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Go back and fix it. If anyone could pull it off, it would be you, Naru. I know what Sasuke had in mind when he gave you his eyes. A blonde woman sat with her eyes closed and her head back against a wall. As a kunoichi, she didn't place much value on appearance, but she was what some would consider beautiful. She had 3 whisker marks on each cheek and her skin was lightly sun-kissed. She had long, straight hair that fell past her knees, but it was also a little unkempt. It would likely be more noticeable and resemble her father's hair if it were shorter. As it was, though, it reminded her more of her mother. 2 clips held back the left side of her bangs. She was wearing a long white, sleeveless haori that resembled her father's, the Yondaime Hokage. But instead of orange, the flame. Light patterns on the edges were dark red. Under the Uzumaki spiral on the back of the haori, she wore an orange tank top with a low cut that ended just above her navel. Accompanied by a dark violet, blue, mid-thigh apron skirt with side slits. She wore knee-high black shinobi boots and short black shorts underneath that. Naruto. Have you given up? The voice that Obsidian knew wasn't coming from her head caused her eyes to snap open. She looked up into stoic-looking green eyes, her haunted irises gleaming in the light streaming in through the windows from the rising sun. She whispered, "You know me by now, Gaara. I don't give up," and Gaara moved forward. Though he had always been short, he was barely an inch or 2 taller than when they were 16, with messy red hair, pale skin, and a love kanji on his forehead. But now, from the corner of his mouth to the corner of his left eye, there was a scar. Perhaps, wasn't kind, would be a better way to describe how the Fourth Shinobi War had treated everyone. Many of the major players had been dealt with, but it was far from over. Madara himself was the only one left, and fortunately the Jubi plot had been foiled years before. She was 16 when the war began, and she is now 19. Many had died defending their families, friends, and homes. The Konoha 11 and other valuable individuals were the most cruel to Naruto. Shizune, Tsunade, and Kakashi are all dead. Sakura and Sasuke, who had been among the last to pass away, left Naruto's mind the most scarred. Her eyes had been bright blue 5 months prior, but they are now deep black. Sasuke's eyes were the same as before he transferred them to her using a forbidden Uchiha jutsu, more specifically his bloodline. Given that she wasn't Uchiha by birth, Naruto most likely would have perished from the jutsu if Kurama hadn't assisted the new DNA in properly blending with her own. The genetic code containing the Sharingan bloodline was all that was transferred with the eyes by the jutsu. Consequently, she was able to use it. Otherwise, it would have just been an eye swapping jutsu. This implied that although she was not directly related to Sasuke, her DNA would indicate that she had Uchiha ancestry. The fact that such a technique existed always astounded her when she looked in the mirror. She could see why the Uchiha clan would have developed such a jutsu, even though it seemed a little out of character. Considering that medical ninjutsu wasn't always what it is today and that the Uchiha clan had a penchant for needing to switch eyes, usually due to the Mangekyo, there was probably a reason it was forbidden now. However, it was still shocking to see black eyes staring back at her every time, and it hurt even more to know whose eyes they were. Sakura was the only member of Team 7 still alive after Sasuke and Sakura had both passed away on the same day. Kakashi had been the first to leave, followed by Sai, Yamato, and eventually even Sakura and Sasuke. Except for a few, she had lost everyone over the years. Hanabi, Hinata's younger sister, Konohamaru, his cousin Kurenai, and Asuma's daughter Mirai were among the few who survived, along with Gaara and Killer Bee. "I know," Gaara uttered, his smile barely perceptible. "You haven't done much of anything, other than prepare in case we're attacked and stay in this room. Mind sharing whatever it was Uchiha and Haruno said to you before they died?" With a sigh, Naruto slowly got to his feet. "There's a seal that Jiraiya and the 3rd Hokage worked on together. A time-space seal which allows one to go back in time, theoretically speaking." Gaara's eyebrows went up. "Theoretically?" asked he. Sighing, Naruto went on, "Yes, they never finished it. After the Kyuubi attack it just sat in storage in the Hokage vault, but Tsunade and Sakura found it when they were going through things. Then after the war started, Sakura and I began looking into it. I had some help from Kurama, who isn't completely ignorant of Fuinjutsu seeing as he was hosted by 2 Fuinjutsu mistresses in the past. It wasn't until Sasuke returned we made any real progress, but we weren't sure if it was a good idea." Gaara remarked, "I don't understand how it couldn't be. Explain." She gave a nod. Naruto spread out one of the larger scrolls in front of her after removing it from a desk in what was actually the Hokage's office. She described the intricate seal while pointing out some of its characters. Messing with time isn't easy. We had to basically come up with some of these seals through guesswork. We knew what we wanted them to do, but if they actually work properly. Well, it's not a seal that we can test. In the end, we weren't sure if there would be consequences and what they might be. For all we knew, it could cause an instant paradox, or blow up, killing everyone involved. Theoretically, one should arrive back in time in their present body, leaving a copy of their younger self walking around. But Sakura thought of the problems with that. For one, we don't know if it's possible or safe for more than one of us to be around. We assumed it would be, since souls are always changing until adulthood, and even after one reaches full maturity it'll make small changes, or pulses, to correspond with events in one's life, traumatic or otherwise, and one's personality and moods. In theory, that means the person who travels past self wouldn't be identical soul-wise, allowing for them to coexist in the same timeline. Gaara blinked. That sounds complicated. It is, Naruto sighed and said. Sakura was much better at explaining, and it gets even more complicated. We also can't choose how many years we go back. For all we knew, we'd end up before we were even born. Before Konoha was even founded. We don't even know if a person can survive going back in time. Like I said, it could blow up, or the strain on the body being pulled through time could cause brain hemorrhages or heart attacks. Instant death, scowled Gaara, so it won't do us any good. Naruto gave a headshake. Not necessarily. Kurama mentioned that if it did work, and he alluded that it was possible to travel through time, it would take a lot of chakra. Biju chakra, in fact. It makes me the perfect person to attempt it, and the others believe that it would be safest for a Jinchuriki to use. Kurama also mentioned that giving someone a bit of his chakra would basically, in theory, give them safe passage as well. We had planned, before that battle, to use it, but you three never got the chance, Gaara remarked with a hint of pity. He could relate. Like his sister and brother, he had also lost friends and comrades in the war. Naruto gave a nod. I think I understand, but what I don't understand is what you mentioned before, about souls. How can you be sure the soul changes over time, or that you won't just create a new timeline separate from this one? How can you be sure you won't end up in a different dimension, similar to the one Madara threw you and Sakura into years ago? After blinking in response to Gaara's inquiries, Naruto let out a defeated breath and scowled deeply. I don't, she acknowledged. It's all theory, Gaara. There is no way to prove any of this. I suppose someone who didn't believe in the existence of a soul would probably not even consider the possibility that two of the same person could coexist in the same timeline. It was just a theory and a potential solution. If the soul does exist, it makes sense that it would evolve and change over time based on the kind of person someone becomes or changes to be. I'm not sure if I'll wind up in the past of our reality, but we talked about the possibility of dimensional travel instead, and ultimately decided that the benefits outweighed the drawbacks. We're losing the war. We've lost more than half of our best shinobi. He was stating a fact, not a question, when he said, I assume this is what your teammates said before they died. Yes, said Naruto, I believe it's our only hope. And this chronology? Whatever happens to it? Gaara inquired. One of two things, based on our theories. Naruto bit her lip. There is one other possibility, Kurama mentioned. It either remains the same, a different timeline to where I end up, or it is erased after the past has changed. This timeline might require me to use a lot of demonic chakra with my own. Implode once I've left and the seal has been activated. Sadly, it is a one-way trip and a temperamental seal. The reason I'm hesitant to use this timeline is that I'll never know what will happen to it. It might be a miracle cure or a death sentence for everyone in this timeline. Someone calmly said, you have to do it, from behind them. Naruto turned to see a teenager with dark hair that was a little spiky and dark eyes, which was Konohamaru. Hanabi, who was only a few inches shorter than the boy she was standing next to, had long brown hair tied back and the typical Hyuga white eyes. She looked like her sister but also took more after her father. The toddler holding her hand was a recent 3-year-old girl with shoulder-length black hair and deep crimson eyes. She looked a lot like Kurenai and Asuma, though kids usually did look like their parents. What? Konohamaru-kun, if you've been there as long as I believe you have, you heard what I said, Naruto inquired. The repercussions. Hanabi cut in, don't matter, Lady Hokage. Naruto grimaced briefly. She would never get used to that title. Although she had fulfilled her dream of becoming Hokage, it was bittersweet because she had never imagined herself in a conflict zone. As Hanabi went on, I apologize for interrupting you, but I believe we all realize we're losing. She shook those ideas. At least you can attempt to fix it in a different timeline even if this place does end up disappearing. The advantages outweigh the disadvantages, as you stated. This might be our only chance, Konohamaru said, grinning at his friend and the person he had considered an older sister since he was a young boy. Hanabi-chan is right. Naruto gazed at all three of them for a moment before letting out a sigh. She knew they were right, even if she would never see them again, at least not in their current state, but she didn't want to take the chance, or at least part of her didn't. All right, she said, but we have to get ready. We must act quickly if we are going to do this. Her back was on what felt like rough ground, and she moaned as she looked to the side and saw dead blue eyes. She woke up to the sound of loud conversation. She blinked, unsure of what to make of the familiar blue eyes staring back at her, and then it dawned on her. Though she didn't feel right, Naruto felt different, as though she had been torn apart and then reassembled, molecule by molecule. What? Kushina. After hearing just a few of the words, she felt a sharp object dig into her back. She yelled as a cool, icy hand grabbed her arm and pulled her to the side, seemingly swinging her around. Although she could have stopped the movement, she chose to let go of the smaller hand as a larger one grabbed her other arm and pulled her away from what she now realized was a large claw that had skewered two familiar people. In an attempt to skewer her, Kyuubi, whom she was only now realizing, wriggled a second claw into some freedom and attempted to do so. If the man hadn't yanked her away in time, he would have been successful. How did you get here, and who are you? Blood dripped from his mouth, and the gorgeous redhead in front of him was in the same situation. The man's words were slow, not hesitant, but she wouldn't expect less from someone who had been so badly hurt. She recognized them right away, and as she struggled to find the right words to tell them, she became aware that the seal had been successful and that she was still alive. When she looked over, she saw herself on the altar-like platform, crying almost silently, even though she hadn't anticipated arriving on the day the Kyuubi was sealed inside her infant self. She felt tears well up in her eyes as she saw her parents, Namikaze Minato and Namikaze Uzumaki Kushina, standing in front of her. She spoke so softly that she assumed they wouldn't hear her say, I'm Naruto, but their wide eyes told her they did. That isn't feasible. Kushina exclaimed, Naru-chan is just a baby, and her eyes aren't black, and Naruto cast a sorrowful glance down. She was aware that they were suspicious, that it was difficult to believe, and that they were running out of time. She looked down and saw that she was no longer the same woman she had been as an adult, but rather a teenager who was shorter, about 5 feet 0 inches. Upon initial observation, she appeared identical to her 14-year-old self. The only way she knew to prove her identity was to lift her shirt to reveal the Shikifujin on her stomach, causing both of her parents to gasp and soften their eyes. Both of them were aware that it was impossible to fake that seal, and that only they knew how to do it. However, if Sandaime hadn't already figured it out, he might be learning. How is Naruto? Minato coughed up blood and asked. To put it simply, I used a space-time seal that transported me back in time, but I doubt I have enough time to explain everything. The Sandaime may have shown you his and Jiraiya's project, but I'm not sure. The future is not what it seems, it is not tranquil. With her head pounding, her body hurting, and the blood dripping down her back from where the Kyuubi's claw had dug in, those were the only words she could think of to describe it. Being sent back in time must have hurt a lot, and it had also delayed her age by years. She blamed the seal's effects for her ignorance. I wish we had more time to talk, Naruto, but, I see, Minato said sadly, we don't. Due to the blood she had to cough up, Kushina was unable to finish her sentence. I'm happy that we got to see you grown up before we. She suspected it was the same words her parents had spoken to her in the original timeline, and Naruto watched with tears streaming down her cheeks as they turned to her baby self and started talking. It struck her hard, seeing her parents' last moments and knowing there was nothing she could do about it. Her parents looked at her with pride and concern, and she realized with a heavy heart that they were proud of her. She fell to her knees, the strength she had to keep standing giving out, and her tears stopped. Only a few times had she experienced this type of feeling, the joy that comes from having someone, like family, be proud of them. In an attempt to preserve what little life she still had, Kushina exclaimed, Naruto, and advised taking care of both herself and her younger self. We were concerned that, as a Jinchuriki, she might not have a happy childhood, but we know you'll make sure she does. Minato nodded and grinned. He turned back and narrowed his eyes. Listen to your mother, Naru, he said. Seal, he said. As the Kyuubi vanished, Naruto saw the seal briefly appear to glow on her younger self's stomach. Her body striking the floor was the next thing she knew. She realized she had somehow ended up lying close to her mother and father, who both stared at her with dead eyes. Tucson, Kasen, she thought. It would be eerie, but for now it was just depressing. She had returned to save lives and make a difference, but she was powerless to do either of those things. "Sir, who is she?" "I don't know, but I don't think she was a threat," a voice that sounded familiar said. "Otherwise, she would not have been permitted to stay by Minato and Kushina. She looks very much like them, and those marks, like the girls." "Well, I'm not really sure, but that headband, it's recognizable." Trying to keep her eyes open, Naruto listened and considered what the Sandaime, the only voice she recognized, was saying. Since she knew she couldn't bring a Konoha forehead protector with her when she left the future, she sealed the one she had in one of the scrolls in her hip pouches. After her heritage was revealed to her when she became a genin, she discovered the one she had worn for her trip in her mother's possession. She felt a little naked without a Hite-8 after wearing one for so long. Despite not becoming an Uzushio Kunoichi, her mother had received a Whirlpool Hite-8 before she left Whirlpool. The Sandaime said, "Take her to the hospital, I'll talk to her when she's able." The Jinchuriki, too. The way the unidentified voice referred to her younger self made Naruto irritated. If this was going to work, she would need to start thinking of herself by a different name because having two Narutos running around would just confuse everyone. Fortunately, she had been ready for it. "I will take her with me, and look after her for a few days until arrangements can be made." That was the final sound Naruto heard before she passed out once more. She didn't wake up until the next day. When she woke up, it was only a matter of minutes before the Sandaime entered the room after she realized an Enbu had been on guard. Naruto was momentarily shaken by the shock of seeing the Sandaime Hokage, who was years younger than when she had last seen him, but the Hokage's words brought her back to the present. "I see you're awake," he said. "It's sooner than we expected. You seem quite injured, though mostly a severe case of chakra exhaustion." Naruto was unsure of how to react to that because she had never experienced chakra exhaustion in its full form before. She had previously experienced extreme chakra depletion, but not to the extent that her body failed and she entered a state of chakra exhaustion, which could result in death or, alternatively, comas. She wasn't a medic.nin, but she had learned some basic medical ninjutsu from Tsunade years ago, and she was pretty good at healing wounds the old-fashioned way, or the civilian way. She also knew a lot about anatomy and pressure points because she used them in her taijutsu techniques. "If you don't mind, I'd like to talk about how you arrived at the sealing scene and how you are related to Namikaze Minato, Uzumaki Kushina, and Uzumaki Naruto." Assuming the young girl would remain silent, Hiruzen added, "Of course, along with who you are." He didn't know if it was shock or a lack of trust that made her want to remain silent at that moment. Naruto said, "I understand, Hokage Sama," and nodded. "All right, I'll go outside and let you put on your clothes." He turned to leave the girl alone after saying, "Your belongings are in the small cupboard beside your bed." The blonde girl's onyx eyes, which were too old for someone so young, were the only thing he could think about as he stood outside the doors. They weren't meant for young teenagers, who couldn't be older than 15, if that. He had seen them on war veterans and those with difficult upbringings and histories. Unfortunately, shinobi with eyes that had seen too much too soon were not uncommon. She straightened her mesh armor shirt, which she wore underneath a dark orange crop top that hung down to her ribs, just below her large B-cup bust, while she looked at herself in the mirror once more. All of this caused her to realize that she was 14 again rather than the taller, 19-year-old Hokage she had previously been. The biggest clue to her age, she thought ironically, was the size of her breasts, which had been a smaller B-cup before she was 14 and a rather large C-cup by the time she returned to Konoha at 16, after 3 years of training with Ero Sennin. She was also 5'5", not 5'0". She had grown to 5 feet 6, which was remarkable considering how short she had been as a child, and they had remained a large C-cup at 19. Growing up, she ate too much ramen and not enough wholesome foods, but that was because she was never offered high-quality food that fit her personality. The food they did reluctantly give her was so expensive that she had developed a distaste for most fruits and vegetables. Fortunately, it appeared that her theory of paradoxes and the possibility of having multiple copies of oneself in the same timeline was correct, and everything was fine except for the years that had been removed from her age when she had arrived in the timeline she was now a part of. Neither of them had gone crazy, and the timeline hadn't collapsed when she was just a few feet away from her infant self. The seal was a one-way trip, so she would have to live without knowing whether she was altering her future or merely constructing a hopeful future for another timeline. If any other theories were true, she would most likely never find out. Shaking her head away from thoughts, Naruto took another look at herself. She had lost height, so her clothes were a little loose on her, but she was able to adjust them. The mesh armor underneath the shirt was probably the best fit because they were one size. Fits. All, and there was something about the way they were made that allowed them to stretch and adjust to any weight, height, or gender. The normally calf length white Haori was now ankle length, but at least it wasn't horribly over sized. Her shoes fit perfectly, and she had her hip pouches and weapon holsters in place. She corrected the length of her Anbu style pants by putting them into her shinobi boots and taping them down with bandages at her ankles and shins. It was strange to see the dark violet fabric and whirlpool spiral in place of the Konoha leaf symbol, but the forehead protector was there as usual. She was used to having much longer hair, so it was a little annoying that it was waist length. She did this to keep a reminder of her mother and make her hair a little easier to manage. Not that looking in the mirror didn't do that, but she had always loved her long hair, and it made her smile. Since she was forced to pull back one side of her bangs in order to function as a kunoichi and see properly, the resemblance was more noticeable when it was long. As it was, many girls, particularly kunoichi, wore hair clips to keep their bangs out of their eyes, so it wasn't just that she wanted to look like her mother or that she was copying a style. The Hokage was waiting for Naruto when she left the room after taking a deep breath and putting her long hair in a low ponytail, allowing her bangs to frame her face. One side was naturally pulled back by her two hair clips. "I'm ready," she declared, "because I have a lot to explain." Hiruzen nodded, noticing how much she resembled Kushina, Minato, and baby Naruto. If she weren't so elderly, he would have sworn she was either Uzumaki Naruto's mother or their daughter. Since her arrival, rumors had been circulating, with some speculating that the girl might have some sort of relationship to the Jinchuriki, while others more bizarrely suggested that she was the mother of the child, despite the fact that she could not have been older than 15 herself. In their field, some never lived past their mid-20s, and that was if they were lucky, so they tended to start families younger than the average civilian. To the civilians, it meant something slightly more scandalous than to the shinobi. It was more prevalent when he was younger, but it is still prevalent enough today. He said, "Follow me," and the two proceeded to the Hokage's office. Along the way, Naruto noticed that many people were whispering and that some people were stopping to stare at her. She could not hear all of the whispers, but from what she could hear, she made a big impression with her arrival. She noticed that many of the whispers were about her identity, including whether she was a spy or related to the Red Chained Death, the Yondaime, or the Jinchuriki. "Don't you think we should begin with introductions?" When they got to his office, Hiruzen sat behind his desk and asked. Naruto took a deep breath before starting. "I'm not sure how well you're going to take this, Hokage Sama, but I think I should just be blunt," he said. "Does the Fuinjutsu, Jiken Ripperu Fuin, Time Ripple Seal, mean anything to you?" The girl's declaration and question caused Hiruzen to sit rigidly in his chair, his eyes widening slightly. How could she possibly know that name? No one, but he and Jiraiya were aware of that project. Shortly before the end of the Third Shinobi War, it had reached a standstill and had not been discussed since. He had considered it briefly before, but neither he nor Jiraiya were certain how to complete the seal or whether it was a good idea at all, as it could be disastrous if it ended up in the wrong hands. "Who are you?" The blonde bowed her head respectfully as he asked, his eyes narrowing. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto, and I'm from the future," she replied. As he considered what she had said, Hiruzen sighed and lowered his shoulders. It would explain why she resembled baby Naruto, Minato, and Kushina so much, but it wouldn't explain her eyes, which he was certain were the same vivid blue as Minato's. Additionally, he was aware of only a few Uzumakis, Mito and Kushina, and neither Namikaze nor Uzumaki had eyes that dark, though he could be mistaken. "All right, so the seal was finished. I'll need to be persuaded," he muttered inquiringly. "However, I would like to know about your Hite.8. Why do you wear the Uzushiogakure symbol rather than the Konoha one? And your eyes no longer resemble those of your younger self." Naruto gave a nod. "Myself and two other people finished the seal. In addition to being an expert in ninjutsu and taijutsu, I am also a fuinjutsu mistress. Additionally, I have advanced kenjutsu skills." "So many special abilities?" He raised an eyebrow in question. "I wasn't this young before I came, but it took me years and a lot of training. I'm actually the Rokudame of Konohagakure, and I'm 19. Since I don't have any records here and no one knows me, I was unable to show up wearing a Konoha headband, which is why I was Hite.8. I gave in because it was a memento of my mother's time spent in Whirlpool and a protector for her forehead. After giving a nod, Hiruzen saw the blonde take out a folded picture and then slide it toward him. As for evidence, I have some items. That photo shows our sensei, Hitaki Kakashi, with my teammates, Haruno Sakura and Uchiha Sasuke. Because of Naruto's melancholy delivery of these names, Hiruzen thought they had passed away in her timeline. Naruto viewed the picture with regret. She had started carrying it with her shortly after returning to Konoha from her 3-year training trip, and she was glad she had since it served as a reminder of her past successes and the reasons behind her decision to get the seal. When the old, wrinkled photo was unfolded, Hiruzen was taken aback, but he also kind of expected it. In the center of the team photo was a girl with pink hair who was grinning broadly. Next to her was a boy who was clearly a Uchiha, with raven-colored hair, black eyes, and fair skin. On her other side was a girl who appeared to be a younger Naruto, and behind them was Hitaki Kakashi, who was slightly older by 10 years. The girl sitting in front of him had bright blue eyes, but that was the only difference besides age. There is also this. Naruto lifted the mesh armor shirt to reveal her stomach, and the seal containing the Kyuubi materialized after a moment of chakra channeling. Hiruzen looked at it for a moment and then nodded, knowing now that Naruto was telling the truth and that a seal like the Shiki Fujin could not be faked. With a sigh, Naruto tucked a strand of her hair that was still loose from her ponytail behind her ear and lowered her shirt, canceling the chakra flow to the seal and making it vanish from view. A recent event in my timeline is the reason my eyes are this color. I think I should first explain why I came back, she started, and Hiruzen sat forward, eager to hear but afraid of what she would say. It started to go south when I was almost 13. Orochimaru appeared during the Chunin exams in which my team and I took part. In an attempt to obtain the Sharingan, he put the cursed seal on my teammate Sasuke. I apologize for disturbing you, Naruto, but could you please explain Orochimaru's decision to target Sasuke? The Hokage inquired. The village is full of Uchiha. It may seem odd that he would ask that rather than why Orochimaru would target Sasuke, but he wasn't particularly shocked because Hiruzen had been suspecting his former student of being bad for months and wished he hadn't been right. Before responding, Naruto sighed and winced, saying, "Not in my time. After you and the elders ordered the clan to be massacred, Sasuke was the last. They were planning a coup, as far as I can tell. The elders pushed things along before you could come up with a peaceful solution, even though you wanted to do so." Hiruzen sighed after freezing. "I see." Naruto went on. With Suna's assistance, Orochimaru and his Sound Nin invaded the hidden village he had built over the years during the Chunin exam finals. Orochimaru killed you during the invasion, and Ero, Sennin, Jiraiya, and I went to find Tsunade Bachin so she could become Hokage a short time later. Hiruzen's eyebrows shot up in surprise. You really persuaded Tsunade to take on the role of Hokage again? Naruto smiled. Godem Hokage was a fantastic Hokage. A lot happened after we returned with Tsunade, and after a failed mission to return Sasuke back to the Leaf, after he left to join Orochimaru in order to gain power to avenge his clan. I went with Jiraiya on a 3-year training trip, Naruto stated, adding that Shizune Nichan still believed she drank too much. Hiruzen was interested in learning more about Uchiha Sasuke's defection, but he decided it must be a very delicate topic based on the pain in her eyes and voice, which is why she only touched on it briefly rather than going into detail. She claimed, I was about 16 when the Fourth Shinobi War really began, and Hiruzen felt as though she had been hit in the stomach. He was certain that the future conflict had not ended well because she had used the Jiken Ripparu Fuin, Time Ripple Seal, in the Fourth Shinobi War, which took place just over 10 years after the conclusion of the Third. Ironically, he had fully come to terms with the fact that he would die in 13 years, or at least, he had in her timeline, where he was able to stop it, but what really grabbed his attention was the potential war. In years to come, the majority of people would have concentrated on the fact that someone had just informed them they would die. It wasn't going well, and it isn't. Akatsuki was the first, and the war followed. The war continued despite our efforts to build an alliance with the other villages, Kiri, Suna, Kumo, and Iwa. After a year, there were 3. What was left of Suna had moved to Konoha, which had suffered the least amount of damage thus far but had still lost a large number of shinobi and civilians. When I was 18, Iwa, Kumo, and Kiri were all barely standing, and Kiri had fallen shortly after Suna. With a deep frown etched on his aged face, Hiruzen muttered, "This is troubling news. I take it this was your last resort?" Naruto gave a nod. There was an invasion in my timeline approximately 5 months ago. Tsunade had passed away when I was 18, so I had been Hokage for about a year. Although everyone gave it their all and I had hoped it would be the last battle, there were simply too many and not enough Alliance members remaining. It was difficult for me to stand up to the enemy force's commander because of his strength. My teammates Sasuke and Sakura looked after his right-hand man, who had trained under Orochimaru and knew how to bring the dead back to life to fight for them. While I was doing this, numerous skilled shinobi were brought back by them, and they were compelled to defend him. The news caused Hiruzen's eyes to narrow, and he felt a fierce rage at someone who could desecrate a person's body in a way that would make them come back to life and make them fight in a war against people they had once known and loved, a village they had sacrificed their lives to defend. He trailed off, this leader, before Naruto interrupted. "You might not believe me, but it's Uchiha Madara," she stated. "Madara?" With wide eyes, Hiruzen uttered, "But he's dead." "No, he isn't. After all, there was never a body. He lived and was very difficult to kill." With a tone of intense rage, she described the man as, "Like a cockroach, he keeps coming back." I was unprepared for the invasion I mentioned, and Madara got a lucky shot in. I was unable to recuperate quickly enough and Sasuke's separation from Sakura would have prevented my death. He sensed that I would require assistance, so Sakura urged him to go. Madara came very close to killing me, but Sasuke was in front of me and took the hit instead. Only a select few Uchiha were aware of the forbidden jutsu he used before he passed away, which allowed them to transfer their eyes to another person. It was typically applied to another member of their clan, but because I'm not biologically a Uchiha, it hurt me a little more. For starters, my eyes were fine, and it's typically used to treat eye damage. Hiruzen, who had witnessed numerous war veterans close their eyes when compelled to discuss specific incidents, was certain that Naruto's eyes were closed due to unpleasant memories. Hiruzen was surprised to see a fully grown, blazing Sharingan staring back at him when the blonde's eyes snapped open. "The Sharingan. Did you really manage to turn it on?" he muttered, surprise and awe in his voice. "But how? Genetics is linked to bloodlines, and the only example of this is Kakashi, whose eye was manually transplanted and activated. I'm not normal, but for a normal person, it might work that way. In addition to the fact that I'm a Jinchuriki, Sasuke's use of jutsu involved more than just eye transfers. To ensure that the bloodline follows the eyes, the genetic strand containing the Sharingan is passed along with the eyes. It was one of the reasons that few people were aware of its existence, that it was prohibited, and that it was only ever used on another member of the clan. By chance, Sasuke discovered it. Later, Kurama informed me that I would have died if the Sharingan's genetic code hadn't merged with my own if it weren't for my Uzumaki blood and him being sealed inside of me. Sakura, my other teammate, lost her life while removing Kabuto. It was Kabuto who was bringing the shinobi back to life to battle us. Hiruzen thought the shocks had stopped when he realized who the girl was, but they continued to come, and he shook his head as her eyes turned back to black. "Kurama, I take it that he is the Kyuubi because you said he was sealed inside you?" Hiruzen inquired. Naruto gave a nod. "Yes, his name is Kurama. His title is just Kyuubi. Although it took some time, we have been partners since the war. He attacked last night because of Madara, who also dragged him away from my mother's seal." The Hokage rubbed his temples and sighed. "I see." He nodded, turning to face Naruto. "I can't blame you for wanting to make changes. Things got worse after that, I believe. Right now, my only thought is to greet you as a guest in the village. You're above Jonin level, I assume." "I'm not really sure. Since I'm younger here, I must admit that my body isn't as good as it was in the past. It's likely that I'll need to retrain my body to match my knowledge. My Chunin level is high, but my Jonin level is definitely low. You will require a backstory and a nickname. 2 Uzumaki Narutos running around is not possible. This is going to be challenging. We need to know who you are, why you came at this time, how you are related to Minato, Kushina, and Naruto, and why you possess the Sharingan." Naruto grinned like a fox. "We had considered that. It was originally intended that Sakura, Sasuke, and I would use the seal together, but after their deaths, plans changed. I made some changes to the original cover story before departing the future in order to include my relationship with the Uchiha family. To make sure it would work, I even looked at Sasuke's family tree," Naruto said, inhaling deeply. "My name is Uzumaki Nariko, and I was born on October 1st. I will be 14 years old. I was born in Uzushiogakure, and shortly before Uzushio was destroyed, I became a genin of Uzushio at the age of 7 and a chunin at the age of 9. Uzumaki Shiori, the daughter of Uzumaki Chizu and Uchiha Koda, was my mother. My grandmother was pregnant, but my grandfather was unaware of it until they happened to cross paths on a mission. If my memory serves me correctly, he passed away early in the Third War. The reason I look like Uzumaki Kushina is because Uzumaki Chizu was her aunt. Recalling a Uchiha Koda who had killed a group of 30 Iwa.nin during the war, Hiruzen nodded. I was born in Whirlpool a year after my father, Namikaze Seiji, had an affair with my mother when his son was 6 years old. Naturally, my father died on a mission shortly after I was born and Minato was enrolled in the academy, but he was aware of me but never told anyone. This explains why I have the Sharingan and why I look like the Yondaime Hokage, his wife, and my infant self. My grandfather's eyes were passed down to me. I have a birth certificate, some documents I made, and falsified documents. Upon accepting the folder of documents, which contained nearly all the necessary materials to establish Uzumaki Noriko as a legitimate identity and former Uzushio Kunoichi, Hiruzen could not tell that it was a fake. Everything appeared to be entirely genuine. A birth certificate, mission logs, and her days of service to Uzushiogakure before it was destroyed were also found, along with blood test results that were dated a few months earlier and, of course, were forged to show her as Minato's half-sister and Kushina's second cousin. His words, "It all looks to be in place," Naruto scowled after stating, "I had help getting it ready," adding, "I believe that only a select few should know the truth. Not to offend Hokage Gigi, but I don't trust the elders at all." Hiruzen grinned and remarked, "You have people in mind that you would like to know?" Naruto, or perhaps Noriko, nodded, "Yeah," adding, "Hitaki Kakashi is the first person I'd like to know. He was my friend and future sensei, and I want him to know what's happening. In addition, he is among the few who are aware that Naruto is the daughter of Minato and Kushina. I'll have to consider the rest. I suppose the truth will eventually be revealed, but it's probably best to keep it hidden from most people. When Naruto is older, she will eventually be told." Hiruzen started, Yes about Naruto. I doubt I could persuade you to let Naruto go anywhere other than to live with you?" Naruto squinted his eyes. "You'd be right. Before they completed the sealing, I had the opportunity to speak with my parents. I want to give her the childhood I never had, but I also have to take care of her." "All right, so what are we going to tell the public right now? It is still unknown that Naruto is the daughter of Kushina and the Yondaime." Hiruzen thought, Iwa would be thrilled to kill her, but they'd probably feel the same way about you, and Naruto shrugged. "I can take care of myself in terms of Iwa if you just tell them the cover story. Inform them that I learned about my brother and survived the destruction of Uzushiogakure. I found him a few months ago, but it took me several years. Since I was present for the sealing, it would be best to publicly acknowledge my status as a Jinchuriki. We can say that my father divided the Kyuubi chakra, sealing half of it in baby Naruto and half in me. Since the sealing was only half of the Kyuubi's power and my ancestry, I was able to handle it at such a late age. I won't have to worry about being discovered, getting questioned, or using Kurama's chakra on a mission. The reason I care about Naruto is, we can let them know she's ours. I would say my cousin through Kushina, but since people knew Kushina was seeing Minato, that could lead them to believe Naruto is the Yondaime's daughter. Therefore, we will simply pretend that she is my daughter, which is one of the reasons Minato never acknowledged my existence." No one would doubt the relationship, so Hiruzen nodded after giving it some thought. Since the blonde was Naruto's future self, they would be almost the same, if not exactly the same. However, the fact that Naruto, or Noriko, as he assumed he should start thinking of her, had onyx-colored eyes, like almost all Uchiha, and that she was older would dispel any suspicion that the two were clones of each other, since it was nearly impossible for children to look that much like one parent as far as he was aware. Since she was rather young, typically not as young as 14, but her age couldn't be avoided, and she was mentally 19, people were already assuming that baby Naruto was connected to the mysterious girl's arrival. No one would question the claim. "That will work. I'm glad you thought of this before rushing into using the seal," he said. "You and Naruto can rest there because you know how to get into your parents' house in the Namikaze compound. I'll bring Kakashi in tomorrow, and we'll go over everything with him. I'll deal with the council tonight." After nodding, Naruto got up and followed the Hokage to a corner where she saw a bassinet that contained her younger self. She smiled down at the sleeping infant, glanced at the Sandaime as though to get permission, and then gently picked up the blonde infant. Naru said, "I will see you tomorrow," but Noriko corrected him. As she hurried from the Hokage's office to the Namikaze estate, she thought, "I'll have to get used to the name more. From now on I'm not Uzumaki Naruto." She didn't want anyone to recognize baby Naruto and try anything. "I'm Uzumaki Noriko, the Red Chained Death's cousin and the sister of the Yellow Flash." Even though Konohagakure no Sato had experienced a lot of hardship, war, and startling revelations from their Hokages, they were unprepared for this. The Yondaime Hokage's surviving relative was another Namikaze, a clan that was believed to be extinct after the Yondaime passed away without leaving an heir. Well, everyone was taken aback. It was even more shocking to learn that she was also an Uzumaki on her mother's side of the family and the granddaughter of Uchiha Koda, a man believed to have died childless in the Third War at the age of 41. Since their clan members weren't usually tricked and had bastard children born outside the village, the Uchiha clan was furious at this news. After all, they were a little paranoid about their ancestry, just not as much as the Hyuga clan. In fact, they made a conscious effort to differ from the Hyuga clan as much as possible in their methods. Even though the girl was an illegitimate Uchiha and it was only by pure chance, in their opinion, that she even inherited, let alone awakened the Sharingan bloodline, the only comfort was that she was back in Konoha. Although the woman inherited the typical Uchiha black eyes, skin tone, and sharp features, it appears that her mother, Uzumaki Shiori, did not carry this bloodline. Naruto actually had a picture of her parents together because the cover story was so well planned. Actually, it was a picture of her and one of her shadow clones creating her new parents with a seal henge. Naturally, she was the only one who created Uzumaki Shiori. One of her clones was just made into an exact duplicate of her grandfather. Naturally, the other was the image she had chosen for her mother. Uzumaki Shiori's rounded face resembled that of her daughter, but her jaw and chin were even more pointed. Like most Uchiha, they have pale, ivory skin. Her eyes were slightly narrower but still had the same onyx color and shape as Nariko's, and she did not have the same whisker marks. She had more spikes in her hair, which fell to her ankles, and a single bang that hung over the bridge of her nose between her eyes. Given that she did resemble a cross between an Uchiha and an Uzumaki, it was simple to assume that this photo of her under a plain henge seal, which was nearly impossible to spot, was of her mother. But she had meant to do that. Shortly before she had entered the new timeline with Gaara's assistance, she had taken the photo as additional evidence for her claims. The village was obviously taken aback, but they were ecstatic after realizing the Yondaime's sister's significance. However, the village's initial shock and joy quickly subsided after the sister's identity was made public. The sister in question was the enigmatic girl who had emerged during the Kyuubi attack and was discovered with the bodies of the Yondaime and Uzumaki Kushina as well as the Jinchuriki. One of the few kunoichi of Uzushio still alive, she had wandered around until she came across her brother. Uzumaki Shiori knew very little about him, but her mother had told her about him. Because the Yondaime had divided the Kyuubi's power in half, putting half in his sister's daughter, Uzumaki Naruto, and half in Nariko. Knowing that her Uzumaki blood would prevent her from dying at such a late sealing, the Hokage had disclosed that Uzumaki Nariko, the Yondaime's half-sister, had attended the sealing. The news caused Konoha to split in two. Many believed that the girl was just as evil as her daughter, both of whom were monsters who had attacked their village. Many wanted both to be executed, but the Sandaime quickly silenced them and proceeded to enact legislation. The next generation was not to be informed of Uzumaki Nariko's or Uzumaki Naruto's status as the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Yoko. Death would be the penalty for violating the established law. The Yondaime were trusted by the other half. He must have known what he was doing if he had sealed something as wicked as the Kyuubi no Yoko into his own sister. Like everyone else, they were cautious. She herself was a Uchiha, and many were beginning to blame the Uchiha for the Kyuubi's outburst, having a fully developed Sharingan to demonstrate this. However, in the week following the Yondaime's sister's disclosure, nothing disastrous occurred. The two Uzumakis were disliked by many, it's true, but they dared not try anything. Uzumaki Nariko, after all, was a Chunin of Konoha and a Chunin of Uzushio prior to its destruction. Given that she had the renowned Sharingan at her disposal, she was undoubtedly talented. That did not preclude them from using Nariko and baby Naruto as a vehicle to vent their animosity toward the Kyuubi. Hitaki Kakashi was struggling the most to process all of this. It was because he was aware of the truth, not because Nariko's relationship to his late sensei had been made public. Hours before the Hokage's announcement, he had known. Although she had been standing next to the Hokage during the announcement, he had not yet met her. After he had finished speaking, Shunshin swiftly retreated to what he believed to be her home. It seems that she had anticipated the reactions. From a distance, he had seen her, and he could have easily assumed she was Naruto from the future. Like Kushina, Naruto, or Nariko as she was now called, had long blonde hair that fell down her back with a slight spike. Although Kushina's hair had been pinned straight, she didn't have the same level of fairness as Kushina. but her skin wasn't as tanned as Minato's. Even though he had good vision, he had been quite far away at the time, so it was a distant kiss from a fair sun. However, her eyes appeared dark. The Hokage had explained that it was because her teammate had given her his eyes and bloodline before he passed away using a prohibited jutsu. Hadn't Obito done something similar for him? It had touched a nerve in him. Even without the use of a jutsu, he would have been unable to control only one eye, as though he had been born with the Sharingan. Additionally, he could sympathize with her grief over losing her two teammates. The distinction was that it sounded as though she had lost everyone she held dear during the upcoming conflict. Demon whore, we don't need you or your spawn. The rough voice startled Kakashi out of his reverie and caused him to halt. He saw what was upsetting the fruit vendor as he glanced over at one that was set up 5 to 10 feet away. There's no need for name-calling, sir, a voice that was softer but nearly monotone said. The bright, sunny blonde hair with the subtlest red highlights he had ever seen caused his eyes to widen. Her hair appeared to be a glowing sunset in the sunlight. It was pulled back into a low ponytail and was waist-length. 2 hair clips, one dark orange and the other dark violet, held her loose bangs away from her face on the left side. It was a lot like how Kushina wore her long bangs, which would have gotten in the way of her everyday activities or in a fight. The owner almost shouted, "The hell there isn't," to get people's attention. Kakashi observed how some people glared at the owner, seemingly demeaning him for speaking to their hero's sister in such a way. Nariko just ignored them as others scowled at him. She seemed almost accustomed to it, and Kakashi didn't question her identity because he knew exactly who she was. With his hands in his pockets, Kakashi said, "Let her buy her fruit," after he had moved to within a foot of Nariko and the fruit stand. "You really shouldn't be so rude to a lady offering your business profit. Not to mention you might be careful what you say in the future, someone might take your insults too literally." Nariko appeared to stiffen. Like a deer caught in bright lights, the owner appeared to freeze and stare. The proprietor nodded after a moment, put Nariko's purchases in a bag, took her money. Surprisingly, it was the right amount. Nariko couldn't help but think, and gave the bag to her. After giving the man a courteous thank you, Nariko turned to see a person she had assumed had passed away. Even at 14, Hitaki Kakashi was still himself. Her eyes were indeed dark, and he was correct. Her piercing, haunting, onyx eyes, which he was certain could stop a man cold if she tried, made it easy to mistake her for Uchiha by birth. At the moment, all he saw in them was contented calmness. In addition to the fact that her eyes somewhat mirrored his own, as he too had witnessed war and lost his entire team. Obito had lost Minato and Kushina, Rin a year later, and Obito himself during the Third War. It took him a moment to remember who Nariko was. However, he couldn't fully picture her as Naruto for some reason. Perhaps because Naruto was only a week old and therefore a baby to him. Despite being that baby's future self, Nariko was very different. She was his age, to start. He was nearly a head taller than her. Although her skin tone was a combination of Minato and Kushina's, he had been right that she could easily get a tan if she so desired. Because of Minato's sharper features, her face resembled Kushina's but was sharper. Her eyes were onyx in color, but they were precisely Kushina's shape. If what the Hokage had told him was true, he knew they had once been as blue as Minato's. Her kimono was a light ivory blue color. The sleeves and the bottom were adorned with snowflake patterns. In addition to the Uzumaki spiral on the shoulder, albeit in white rather than the usual Konoha flak jacket color. The obi was ivory with some pale blue stitching running along it. Because it fit Nariko so well, he deduced that it must have belonged to Kushina, most likely when she was younger. She said, "Thank you," luring him out of his reverie. "I take it you know everything?" He nodded, understanding from the way she spoke that she was discussing the reality of who she was. Nariko nodded after appearing to pause for a moment. She said more than she asked, "Would you like to come back to the house with me, we can talk?" "Sure," he replied. He wasn't particularly surprised, but it was all a little awkward, since he assumed he was long dead in her timeline. He was most likely a ghost to her. Naruto is back at the house. His attempt to defuse the situation was somewhat successful because Nariko laughed. "I didn't feel right about bringing her with me so soon. I figured seeing me would anger enough people, so I left her at the house. Don't worry, she's protected." When they got to the house and saw the 2 big foxes that guarded it, Kakashi's reaction made Nariko laugh. Both had 3 tails, and one was pony-sized, while the other was only an inch or 2 taller. Kyuubi had distant ties to the Kitsune summoning clan. The Biju's chakra had a profound effect on the once normal Fox clan, making them bigger and more powerful. This is also why they had multiple tails. With 6 tails, the most any kitsune could have, the clan boss had the most. The only creature that would or could have 9 tails was Kurama, a Biju and the first kitsune to have multiple tails. During one of her visits to Uzushio in her timeline, Kurama had secured the fox contract thanks to her connection, albeit it was weaker now. When she discovered the caves, Kurama had told her that the kitsune contract had originally belonged to the Uzumaki clan, but that only specific clan members had it at one point. The head of the clan is always one of them. It had apparently been lost with the destruction of Uzushio and the death of her grandfather, the last head of the clan. She was able to reclaim the contract with Kurama's assistance and seals left by the clan. Fortunately, now that she was in the past, she was unsure if she could still call forth the toads. Since it was a time-space contract, she knew she could with the Kitsune clan because the foxes would respond wherever she went. She wasn't entirely sure about the toads, but since they had their own world, she could presume that this applied to all summonses. However, there are instances where the elemental nations have entrances. Noriko had made the decision to wait for Jiraiya before calling forth any toads. Yukioru and Yoriyuki were both what are known as twins. The smaller of the two, Yoriyuki had black fur and ivory coat. Of the 2 foxes, he was the male. The female fox, Yukioru, was a little bigger. Unlike her brother, she had dark auburn instead of black, making her a darker ivory. Their eyes were both dazzlingly golden. What? Kakashi trailed off, blinking at the foxes that were staring back at him as though they were bored. "We're not what's rude," complained Yukioru. "These are my summons," Noriko declared with a small smile. The larger one is Yukioru and her brother, Yoriyuki. "I have another fox summon, Asatsuyu, inside keeping an eye on Naruto with one of my shadow clones." Kakashi acknowledged, "I was unaware of the existence of a fox summoning contract." Both Yoriyuki and Yukioru snorted. "Figures," mumbled Yoriyuki. "Even in this timeline we're forgotten." Yukioru gave an eye roll. Yukioru appeared to pause as she continued, blinking as though she was trying to carefully craft her words, before saying, "Of course we are. The timeline has not been changed enough to really be any different." Or determine whether her statements made sense, I think. After giving the Fox twins a sly smile, Noriko brushed them off and ushered Kakashi inside. He had been there before, she knew. After getting to know her, he became close to both her mother and father. She was fairly certain that her parents had lived in an apartment during her mother's pregnancy, so the place was a bit dusty. A location nearer the Hokage's office, as her mother disliked spending so much time alone in such a large house and abandoned compound. Her father spent a lot of time at the office, doing Hokage-like tasks or paperwork. Being Hokage was a challenging job, and she understood that. Even though she hadn't experienced that pleasure, the war had never ended before she arrived at this timeline, especially during or shortly after one. Her mind wandered to her timeline, and she shook her head. That and the people she had left behind were out of her mind. It was best that she didn't think about her timeline because she had no idea what had happened or would happen to it. Her concerns were of a more pressing nature. For example, raising Naruto. At first, that was a daunting situation in and of itself. After caring for Naruto for a week, she had grown accustomed to the concept. She had even grown used to introducing herself as Noriko, answering to it, and signing her name as Uzumaki Noriko. She had been mentally preparing for this for months, and it wasn't too difficult because the name was similar to her birth name. In case there were younger versions of themselves out there, they had all decided on new names. Sakino Sayuri would have been Sakura's replacement. After a lot of arguments, Sasuke would become Uchiha Izuna. It was impossible for anyone to fail to recognize him as Uchiha. Regretfully, none of her closest friends had lived to accompany her back. Although they were obstinate, she secretly wished she could have persuaded Konohamaru, Hanabi, and Akina to accompany her back. They wouldn't leave, believing she was the only one capable of doing anything. That they would only complicate matters and obstruct progress. They saw a small baby as soon as they entered the living room, which was likely the largest room in the house aside from the kitchen, bathroom, and master bedroom. The blonde, blue-eyed baby was lying in a playpen with lots of fluffy pillows and a rotating mobile object above her that was attached to the ceiling with a hook and ninja wire. The girl was not doing much. Orange, blue, red, yellow, and purple were among the vivid colors. The mobile spinning objects were based on animals. Dogs, cats, foxes, toads, and so forth. There was a big fox lying next to the pen. It was perhaps a little smaller than a horse. It had golden eyes and was a black and dark auburn fox. Apart from the eyes, the coloring is somewhat different from that of Yoriyuki and Yukioru. The fox said, "Ah, you're back, Nariko." Haim, slowly sitting up to reveal that it was almost as big as a horse. Behind it, 5 tails are flicking. Additionally, it had a forehead protector around its neck, which was previously invisible from her position. It featured the warrior kanji. However, it was around their front left legs. Yukioru and Yoriyuki had also had one. Kakashi recalled that theirs had contained the kanji for protection. "Yes, thank you for staying here with my clone to watch Naruto for me, Asatsuyu," was Nariko's fox-like smile. "It was a pleasure. I hope we get to see more of the kid in the future. Seeing as who she is, she would make a wonderful summoner when she is old enough." Nariko nodded with a small smile. "Indeed," she replied. Asatsuyu nodded to Kakashi and bowed slightly to Nariko before heading back to the fox's summoning realm. The fox contract was the summons of the Uzumaki clan, though used by only a few at a time. Mainly the clan head and whoever proved worthy. Kakashi gave it a startled look. "I've never seen anything about it in the history books." "You wouldn't? Actually, the history books used now, or at least when I was in the academy, don't really say anything about Uzushiogakure and its relationship with Konoha. I don't know exactly how that came to be since I know it was once something taught, but it wouldn't be in them anyways. The clan was rather paranoid at times, and didn't go around flaunting their skills outside of Fuinjutsu. The fact they held a summoning contract was one such skill." As he considered what she had said, Kakashi scowled and nodded. True enough, he remembered a little bit about Uzushiogakure from the academy books. According to Minato and even Kushina, who had been questioned about her native country, the books had been altered over time, and for some reason, a large portion of Uzushio's history had been omitted. Kushina would scowl and appear agitated about it, as though he knew that one day people would forget that Uzushiogakure was more than just a tiny shinobi village that had been selected for its prowess. For those who are too young to recall the formerly affluent island, anyway. Kakashi couldn't think of anything to say when he asked, "How do you know so much about your mother's clan?" I mean, he was still attempting to take it all in. "You really are Naruto, aren't you?" Grinning, Nariko turned from where she had picked up baby Naruto. She said, "Nice to know you're still smart, Kakashi. Sensei, even at 14, and when she said his name, Kakashi twitched slightly at the playful tone in her voice. "As for how I know, I took a few trips to Uzushiogakure. My clan left certain things for survivors that might show up. There was a few things left by my grandparents in case my mother or one of her children, myself, came looking. It was a seal that acted as a recording of the Battle of Uzushio, and I saw everything. It was one reason my cover story has me as a survivor. I know what happened, so I can't be caught off guard if anyone asks." "How?" he inquired. "I didn't think Fuinjutsu could do something like this. The Hokage said you came back to stop a war. The Fourth Shinobi War, but..." The younger Nariko interrupted the man she knew with a sigh. "If it were only that easy," she uttered, seemingly understanding his meaning. Had she not been able to win the war and rebuild, as she had done each time there had been a great war? "You don't understand how devastating this war was. Every small village with a grudge against Konoha or was persuaded by Madara attacked us, and of course he had Kabuto bringing back the dead to fight for them. Among the dead being great shinobi, some were our friends. Sasuke, Sakura and I saw some hope by using the Jiken Ripuru Fuin and worked in our spare time to complete it. If it weren't for me having studied seals so intensely, Sasuke having some skill in it, and Sakura's intelligence and logic, I don't know if we'd have succeeded. In the end, after they died and I was all that was left, I continued to fight. For 5 months I fought, losing more of my shinobi, and finally the ones left of my precious people convinced me that it was the only way. So here I am." Kakashi thought it sounded like it made the third war sound like a playground argument, and he felt bad about asking when he noticed the tears that threatened to spill from Nariko's eyes. He said, "I'm sorry, about your friends, unsure if it would be of any use. I hope we can work together to stop that from happening this time, Nariko." Nariko grinned. "Sure, though I should warn you now, I'm not known as Konoha's #1 unpredictable ninja for nothing." Beneath his mask, Kakashi grinned. In Nariko, he could readily see Kushina and Minato. Sensei, which somewhat lessened the sting of the loss. Even so, he could see that Nariko was unique. He couldn't help but wonder how Naruto's upbringing by Nariko would affect him. She would undoubtedly be raised differently than he had assumed Nariko would be based on what the Hokage had told him. Though he didn't think Nariko could fully protect Naruto from the village's animosity, he was glad she would have the childhood she deserved. Or at least from people who didn't like Minato, Naruto, or Nariko's ability to seal. At that point, he resolved to do everything in his power to support Nariko and Naruto. She questioned whether she was making the right choices. She had served as Hokage for Shinigami's benefit, so she was familiar with how Anbu operated. She had even considered enrolling in Anbu prior to the start of the war. The majority of the time, Anbu approached you rather than you choosing to enroll in it. 10 months after arriving in the past, she found herself standing in front of the Hokage wearing full Anbu gear and a porcelain cat mask with 3 red stripes. One horizontal on each cheek and one vertical on the forehead. Kakashi stood next to her, wearing the same Anbu uniform as she did, but with dark purple. Black markings in place of red and a proclaim mask that resembled a dog. She was already aware that Kakashi had been in Anbu and that, although not frequently, he had protected her as dog when she was younger in her timeline. She assumed that after her parents passed away, he had frequently immersed himself in missions. However, she was aware that she couldn't be with Naruto all the time because she was still a ninja. Fortunately, she had already formed bonds by the time Anbu approached her with their offer, which was 5 months after her arrival. Asuma, again, he looked so much like Konohamaru at 14, it was amazing, and at first it was a little hard because it reminded her of the boy she saw as a little brother, Kurenai, and Guy, which was kind of overwhelming because it was almost like being around Rock Lee again, and it was almost like the man never changed, past or future. A few months after meeting the others, she had even met Anko, which made her realize that Orochimaru still hadn't left Konoha. Anko had headed straight for the Hokage by the time she got back. He had informed her that he had already located Orochimaru's lab and infiltrated it based on the information she had given him during one of their future discussions. They had rescued some children alive, but Orochimaru had escaped. She discovered from the details that more people had been found alive than Yamato and that it was almost a year earlier than in her timeline. Regretfully, it appeared that Yamato had already received Makuden from whatever Orochimaru had done to him. She was fairly certain that the boy would eventually inherit the bloodline. She was still upset with Hiruzen for not telling her about something that should have been discussed with her. Noriko was so furious that he yelled at the Hokage, something no other shinobi would ever consider doing to him. She didn't think they would have gotten away with it if it had been anyone else. After all, few had the power to question the Hokage and get away with it. Even though it appeared that he was ceding some authority to the council, she made sure to bring this up to Hiruzen during their discussion of the specifics of the future. She cautioned him to exercise caution when granting the council authority, particularly over civilians, and to keep a close eye on the elders. They were elderly and losing sight of what was best, but they had good intentions, Danzo in particular. She knew he tried, but she wasn't sure if he was taking her seriously. She came to believe that he was just finding the time, not that he wasn't trying or listening. After all, Hiruzen was growing older, and being the Hokage was a demanding job. It was why he had initially decided to retire and appoint a successor. Now that Minato had passed away so soon, he had to reclaim the position. She had only been there for almost a year, but she could already feel the changes, but no matter how things change, they remained the same. She was worried about the future of the Uchiha clan because people were still blaming them for Kurama's attack on the village. Even though she knew she couldn't save everyone, she still wanted to save them. It wasn't easy for her to raise Naruto and fulfill her ninja duties. She became an Anbu 5 months after arriving and hardly had time anymore, especially since she had skipped Jonin. She wasn't sure she could balance Naruto and being an Anbu if she hadn't already established relationships with Mikoto and the Uchiha clan. She didn't want to be too far away because she had ties to them through her cover story and even in real life because of Sasuke's eyes. She was a little taken aback by their acceptance of her, but she suspected that Mikoto and Fugaku had played a role. After all, her grandfather, Uchiha Kota, was, as far as anyone knew, a close friend and teammate of Mikoto's father. It was a rather distant relationship, and he was also a cousin, no matter how far away. Kota and Fugaku had fought together during the Third War as well. Kurenai and Anko enjoyed watching Naruto whenever they had free time. Mikoto took on the majority of the babysitting duties, but even Hiruzen would keep her in his office if she had no one else to take her to when she and Kakashi had missions. Although she was no longer active, Mikoto was a Jonin. She didn't mind looking after Naruto when Noriko had lengthy missions or couldn't be there, and she was essentially retired unless called upon by the Hokage. Naruto, Itachi, and Sasuke all enjoyed the summons, but she typically left one of her foxes behind. She had been surprised by that as well. She was aware that Itachi and Sasuke were alive at this time, but it was shocking to see them so young. Itachi, now 6, was only 5 when she came. Naruto had 2 months until her first birthday, while Sasuke was now 1 year old. Naturally, she was now accustomed to seeing them as kids, and in Sasuke's case, infants. She saw them frequently enough, and although she wasn't as close to Fugaku, she was friendly and polite to Makoto when they were together. Hiruzen asked, "Cat, dog, you may take your masks off," luring the blonde out of her reverie. Naruto reached up and removed the mask from her face, while Kakashi followed suit next to her. "Your mission?" "The threat was taken care of. We made it into Tea Country with ease, and found the target where the client said he would be," Kakashi stated. Noriko gave a nod. "I went undercover as one of the girls from the house, and was able to get close to him. After which I was able to finish the job, and leave without being seen," she explained. Observing Kakashi's twitching when she mentioned going undercover, Hiruzen nodded. He wasn't shocked because they had been hired to remove a very rich, cruel, and crafty brothel house owner. Since the target was known to hire shinobi to protect him, he had dispatched Squad 13, one of his best assassination teams. Noriko and Kakashi were among them, but he wasn't shocked by Kakashi's response. For a while now, he had suspected that the boy might have grown fond of the time traveler. He asked, "The shinobi working for him?" "Taken out by myself, Crane, Panther and Squirrel," reported Kakashi. While Noriko handled the inside, we drew the 3 shinobi out, and quickly dispatched of them. He said, "Good job, you and your team may return home," and then he nodded toward a large fox and a blonde lump sleeping among baby toys. "I think you may want to take Naruto as well." Looking back to where Asatsuyu slept with Naruto curled up by her side, Noriko snorted. Noriko didn't recall sleeping that way as a child, but both of them slept like the dead. She had always been a light sleeper, as far as she could recall. "Thank you, Hokage Sama, for watching her. I didn't expect this mission to run on so long or Makoto to have to assist Fugaku on a mission." Hiruzen laughed. "I find life is always filled with unexpected things," he responded. Asatsuyu was awakened by Noriko's lifting of Naruto into her arms, and he growled briefly before recognizing her. The fox said, "Ah, Noriko. Hime," and stood up. "I am glad to see you've returned. I will return now if that is all you need." With a nod, Noriko gave Naruto to Kakashi, who had grown accustomed to the blonde giving him Naruto whenever she needed to free her hands for something. The initial encounters had been uncomfortable, particularly after that D rank. When he was younger to watch the orphans, babies tended to frighten him. Fortunately, Naruto was different from them, not yet. Thinking of her past, she reminded herself that she was her distant cousin. When questioned about her past, it was instinctive to cite her experience as an Uzushio survivor. However, it ought to be 10 months later. Makoto sat the tea tray in the middle of the coffee table and said, "Noriko," grinning, "I'm sorry about the other day. I didn't realize Fugaku would need my help with a mission. I would have let Kokiko watch all 3, but I wasn't sure if you would be alright with that, considering." Knowing what Makoto meant, Noriko sighed. 5 assassination attempts had been made against her and Naruto in the past 10 months. Since Naruto was the weakest, they typically attacked her first. Regretfully for them, she installed ward seals around the compound so that she could easily identify if someone was someone she knew and trusted when they entered. Shinobi made 3 of the attempts, while courageous but stupid villagers made the other 2. Though she always left one alive to give to the Hokage for questioning, she had set an example for them all. 4 months had passed since the last attempt, the longest run of no attacks in a long time. She was fairly certain that they had realized how protective she was of her kids, just like any mother fox would be, and that anyone who believed they could attack her or Naruto and still survive was sadly mistaken. She had to endure the glares, hateful glances, hushed words, and exorbitant prices, of course. Fortunately, it wasn't as horrible as when she was a child. Even though she was only an illegitimate child of the Namikaze and Uchiha clans, she was respected by a sizable portion of the population for being the sister of the Yondaime, a kunoichi, and a member of the Namikaze, Uzumaki, and Uchiha clans. Although some Uchiha clan members didn't like that she was accepted by most of the clan because of the clan head's family's influence, they had grown accustomed to it over the past few months. She trusted Makoto to watch Naruto when she had no one else to leave her with while she worked, so it wasn't strange to see her in the Uchiha compound. It's alright, and it would have been fine to leave her with Kokiko. Obeken. She's your aunt after all, and Asatsuyu would have made sure nothing happened. Makoto chuckled, recalling the big 5-tailed fox. I have to admit you're right. I think your summons scare the majority of people witless, especially after the Kyuubi attack last year, she said with a wink. Noriko said, setting down her teacup. That's why I try not to have them around the villagers. No need to cause a panic, just imagine if I were to summon the boss. Thinking of a big fox the size of the Kyuubi but with 6 tails made Makoto a little pale. Nariko chuckled at the sight of Makoto's face. Don't be like that. Akumamaru isn't the fighting, Nariko smirked into her tea. Makoto's eyebrow went up. She questioned, Akumamaru? Is that the boss fox? Yes, replied Nariko. I don't summon him often. Yoriyuki, Yukioru and Asatsuyu are his kits. Makoto nodded, and when the two women heard squeals coming from the location of Naruto, Sasuke, and Itachi, they turned to face each other. In an apparent attempt to outshine one another, the two infants had seized each other's hair and were tugging. Itachi's normally eerily composed face was wide with uncertainty as he stared, unsure of what to do. After glancing at the two, Nariko started laughing. The two had already started fighting at the age of just 1 year. She pushed the dejected smile away. Would she have also known Sasuke at such a young age if her parents had lived? Would anything have changed if it had? Jiraiya questioned the elderly Hokage, "You're sure this is for the best, sensei?" A cat Anbu with long blonde hair in a high braided ponytail stood next to the Hokage. He was already aware of Cat's identity. He received the news of his student's fate shortly after the Kyuubi attack, and he hurried back so fast that there were rumors of a white flash. When his sensei introduced him to a girl who might have been the daughter of Minato and Kushina, he was in for the biggest surprise because she looked so much like them. She has black eyes, whiskers, and hair that is more spiky than Kushina could have ever imagined. However, Kushina's was so straight that even a little was a lot. He still recalls being astonished and incredulous that Nariko was who she claimed to be. Her tale had been too well planned and realistic to be a ruse by another shinobi village or Iwa. Apart from the fact that she was not using genjutsu or anything else to change her appearance, the Shikifujin on her stomach was what really persuaded him. Although it had taken him a few days to come to terms with it, 10 months later he had become so accustomed to it that he didn't even pause to consider the questions about her identity and background. Only he, Hiruzen, Kakashi, Minato's pupil, and Nariko herself were aware of her true origins. It seemed as though it wasn't even a cover story. She was Kushina Uzumaki's cousin and the younger sister of the Yondaime Hokage to everyone else. One of Uzushiogakyo's final Uzumaki survivors. I understand your hesitation, but Kat and I have been discussing it for some time, Hiruzen replied. Kat, you can remove your mask if you wish. Kat nodded, but she didn't actually take off her mask just yet. She hardly moved from her spot behind the Hokage. After all, she was on duty, and despite having assassination training, she was serving as a guard for the Hokage at the moment. She said, "Thank you, Hokage Sama," and then she turned back to Jiraiya. "Arrow. Sennin, I know why you may be hesitant, I am too, but it's our best bet. We don't want or need Danzo to become an enemy of any sort in the future. Even I don't know a lot in concern to Danzo. In my time he was a paranoid hawk who went too far in his view of Konoha. I am not saying we let our guard down, far from it, but maybe we can appease him, for lack of a better term." He proposed, like giving a child the ice cream they've been denied in small portions, and Kat, Nariko, trembled with suppressed laughter at the ridiculousness of the idea. The Hokage said, "That is one way to phrase it, Jiraiya," with a faint smile and laughter in his eyes. Jiraiya asked abruptly, "Nariko, weren't you the one who wanted to figure out how to put Danzo to death for treason?" A little surprised, Nariko coughed. "Yes, well, my experience with him were never the most nice of experiences. In my timeline he was taken out before he could do any more damage by Sasuke." "Your old teammate?" Jiraiya inquired, making sure he was referring to the correct individual. Over the past 10 months, she had mentioned a number of her close friends, but she never went into great detail, so it was easy to mix them up at times. Nariko gave a nod. "Yes, most of what I know came from Sai, and records I found as Hokage. Mostly hearsay. By giving him the go-ahead for Root, it might make Danzo more of an ally in the future. I don't know how much I can prevent, or what I'll be able to change. I'd be a fool to think I could prevent every bad event in history. For one, I don't know every event, exact dates and causes." With a sigh, Nariko bent his head. Also, Root would be an advantage. Everyone knows of Anbu, but not many know of the Root operatives, and they would be a help if I can't prevent the war from happening. Even if I can, they'd still be helpful in case of the unexpected. Both Jiraiya and Hiruzen nodded, unable to dispute that. Truth is, the main reason Root was disbanded was because they did not have any loyalty to the Hokage, and of course the methods Danzo went to acquire his Root shinobi and how he trained them. That is the problem. How do we know he won't just turn around in a decade and use them to take over the village? As you said, they have no loyalty to the Hokage, Jiraiya responded. You both have good points, but I believe Danzo only has the village's best interest at heart. Even as misguided and twisted as they became in the future timeline, his loyalty as well as his root remains with Konoha. That is good enough for me, and I don't think him foolish. We of course will set regulations before him. Root Shinobi will be registered, and their files accessed by only Danzo and myself. His methods of training will also have to be modified, so they can operate as any other human in society and social situations. Jiraiya interrupted and said, "You think he'll agree to that?" He loved that emotions are weakness to a shinobi. Tangent. According to Noriko, he has no choice. Hokage. Sama's demands are small compared to what he's allowing. I don't know Danzo personally, but I believe he'll see the benefit of having Root a legal branch of Anbu even if he must make some sacrifices. Hiruzen gave a nod. He grimaced when Akage's most despised enemy was mentioned. Now then, I have paperwork to get back to, he started. I'll be bringing this ultimatum to Danzo's attention tomorrow. I expect you and Jiraiya will search for Tsunade within a few days? We'll leave tomorrow, no reason to postpone it any longer. Not to mention I'm sure the brat wants to make it quick so she can return to Naruto quickly, Jiraiya replied. Good, I'll make sure to give Kakashi leave for the next 2 weeks, to give you plenty of time to return. Hiruzen replied. Noriko, you may go for the day. Send in Raccoon on your way out, please. After following Jiraiya out of the room, Noriko bowed and motioned for Raccoon, who was standing a few feet away from the door, to come in. At the village gates, Kakashi and Noriko stood holding Naruto. Some people, mostly older couples, smiled at them in a way he didn't know. However, those who detested Naruto and Noriko for being Jinchuriki either glared at them or simply ignored them as they went by. Naturally, Noriko paid no attention to these individuals. She had a way of pretending that the scowls and detested remarks didn't happen. Only when those who were courageous enough to attack tried to finish the Yondaimi's work, did he witness her becoming upset or angry with them. Kakashi believed they were idiots for not believing in Minato's abilities, but he also knew that neither he nor Noriko could persuade them otherwise. Not just yet, not so soon after the attack by the Kyuubi. In a future battle against Pain, the alleged Akatsuki leader, she had described how she had won the majority of their support. However, a small portion of Konoha still detested her at that time. It shouldn't take too long to find Tsunade. Bachin, Noriko said, bringing him out of his reverie. He couldn't help but notice how she tucked a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear and how the sunlight reflected off it, brightening it. He had started to notice that she had a habit. Under his mask, Kakashi grinned slightly and said, "Mama, we'll be fine, she can play with Pakun again if she wants." Noriko gave a snort. That's just cruel, poor Pakun's tail may never be the same after Naruto finished chewing on it, she murmured. Naruto, with her tiny fist in her mouth, gazed between the two with wide blue eyes as Kakashi snickered. Being an extremely inquisitive infant, Naruto wanted to put everything in her mouth. After the kunai incident, Kakashi and Noriko had learned to watch her closely. Noriko stopped the 9-month-old from chewing on the kunai just as she was about to do so, and neither of them knew how she got it. Ma. Noriko and Kakashi both froze as they gazed at the blonde infant, who would be 1 year old in 2 months. Kakashi blinked and Noriko's eyes widened as she asked, Did she just say mama? Kakashi flinched at the uninteresting glance that Noriko gave him and suggested, either that or she saw mama. Apparently, she didn't want to hear Naruto say something that sounded like, so as her first word. With a giggle, Naruto extended her arms to Noriko. Mama. There was silence for a while, but then Noriko smiled and briefly held Naruto in her arms. Noriko gave Kakashi a sly smile. She said, "Told you so," and Kakashi merely blinked. At least I didn't miss her first word. When he muttered, "By the time you come back she'll be saying Kakashi," Noriko laughed at the hint of a pout in his voice. Looking at the infant on her side, Noriko said, "Hear that, Naruto?" She had grown much more in 10 months than she had anticipated, but then again, Noriko had never really spent much time with infants outside of Kurenai's daughter. "Can you say Kakashi?" Ka.she. Looking back up, Kakashi grinned a little and laughed at how Naruto's face twisted up as though she was perplexed by what her mother was saying. Da, Naruto said, sounding as though she was scolding her mother. The way both of them reacted was hilarious to Jiraiya, who had entered the conversation a little earlier. Kakashi's eyes were wide and his jaw had fallen, or at least seemed to have fallen behind his mask. Noriko's eyes were wide and her mouth was open in shock. Naruto just kept laughing and then put her fist back in her mouth. After the two teenagers had recovered from their shock, the Sannin was fairly certain he saw a slight smile on their faces as Jiraiya's laughter brought them both back to reality. "Smart kid, 2 words in 1 day," he remarked, and as she returned Naruto to Kakashi, Noriko blushed slightly. Trying not to blush, Noriko said to Kakashi, "Okay, I'll see you both in a few days." She simply put it down to her reluctance to leave the village just a week and a half after returning from their most recent Anbu mission, even though she had no idea why she was feeling so anxious or why her stomach felt so knotted. Kakashi said, "We'll see you then," and she looked even more adorable with her cheeks flushed. He observed Jiraiya and Noriko departing the village. Kakashi glanced at the child and smiled. "Mama?" Naruto asked in a tone that was almost inquisitive. "Mama will be back in a few days, Naru-chan. Until then we'll stay at my place, and you can play with the dogs and Asatsuyu." She was having trouble breathing. As she gazed at the bodies of her surviving teammates, arranged alongside the other battle casualties, that was her initial thought. She let tears fall down her cheeks as her eyes stung with pain, and she knew that the jutsu Sasuke had used to switch their eyes was partly to blame. Opening Sasuke's closed eyes would reveal pure azure blue eyes that have faded with death rather than onyx. When she looked in the mirror, she would see Sasuke's black eyes, which were actually Itachi's because Sasuke possessed the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. However, she had inherited them from Sasuke, and the brother's eyes didn't appear to differ in color. She pondered whether Sasuke had felt this way when he saw his eyes in a mirror but knew they were Itachi's. To her, they were Sasuke's eyes. It was almost as painful as seeing Sakura's and his bodies in front of her. It was just her now, and they were the last of her team. Of the rookie 9, she was the only one still alive. "Lady Hokage? Will you be alright?" As she turned, she saw Konohamaru standing there, his face weathered and grizzled from years of fighting. With a sigh, she moved to kneel between Sakura's and Sasuke's corpses. She inhaled deeply before carefully taking off Sakura's forehead shield. As he watched, Konohamaru saw the woman he thought was an older sister remove her own forehead protector and replace it where Sakura's had been. Sasuke also wore a forehead protector, and he saw her swap his out for another. It appeared to have been repaired where the symbol had been cut, and it was old and worn. He recognized it as Sasuke's old Hida.8, the one Naruto had retained following the Uchiha's battle at the Valley of the End, when they had defected to Orochimaru. The Rokudame got to her feet, wiped her eyes, and placed the headbands of her two teammates in her pouch. She muttered, "I'll need time, but I'll be fine," and walked past him. Unless summoned to battle, it was one of the few times the Hokage would be seen outside her office for some time. A pretty teenager with raven hair and distinctive red eyes said, "I heard from a little gossiper that you're a daddy now, Kakashi," as she walked up to the ramen stand. Another girl was with her. She had dark eyes and dark purple hair pulled back in a ponytail. The White Fang's son blushed a little beneath his mask and expressed gratitude for wearing one again. Naruto sat in his lap, giggling with delight at being permitted to eat her father. Figure ramen. Kakashi wasn't sure if Naruto was old enough to consume noodles, so at least he was eating the broth. And Noriko would skin him alive if he did something to her because he was careless. He said, "Hello, Kurenai, Anko," without bothering to respond to her remark. Naruto looked at Kurenai and Anko with wide eyes as they sat down next to Kakashi, smirking. Since the two had previously observed her, it wasn't surprising that she recognized them and giggled. After Kurenai ordered a bowl of beef and Anko ordered a bowl of salt ramen, Anko inquired, "So, where is Nori-chan?" "Mama," murmured Naruto, gazing up at Kakashi in a curious way that Kurenai and Anko had to concede was cute. Anko suppressed the urge to coo, but Kurenai had to. Her reputation would be ruined if someone caught her swooning over a cute baby. "Noriko went on a mission to find someone, she'll be back in a few days," Kakashi stated. Anko started. "So, when are you going to tell Noriko you love her?" This would have been one of those spit-take moments if Kakashi had been drinking. Unfortunately, he choked on his own tongue, but fortunately, he wasn't. In some way. He coughed and choked for a few more seconds before turning to face the two devil women he referred to as friends. Then he managed to choke out, "What?" Both Kurenai and Anko grinned, the former laughing and the latter giggling. Kakashi was a little worried when Naruto joined their cackles and laughs with her own, rather than frightening the infant in her father's lap like most young children would. Kurenai shrugged as though she were telling him the most obvious thing in the world. "Please Kakashi, one would have to be blind not to notice you have feelings for Noriko," she said. After rolling her eyes and muttering, "Even I could tell," Anko abruptly narrowed them and pointed her chopsticks at Kakashi, which was impolite, but Anko didn't care. In my opinion, she's too good for you. Though I expected you to crack ages ago. I swear to every kami out there, if you make me loose my bed I'll feed ya to my snakes. Slowly. As he considered what they had said, Kakashi managed to hide a flinch. He was unable to deny them, even though he wanted to. In actuality, he was falling for Noriko, but his own doubts prevented him from acting. Why would Noriko like him? To start, he was aware that she likely didn't view him in any other light because he had served as her sensei in her timeline. In addition, his subconscious questioned whether it would be improper because, in a different timeline, she had been his sensei's daughter. He had been worried about all of these things for the first few months, but he was unable to bring himself to talk to Noriko about them because he had essentially resolved his problems. The shinobi way of life was risky, and he had never really dated before. Even though they were both young, the life of a shinobi ages exponentially. He was fairly certain that he was in love with the vivacious blonde Kunoichi. However, it was quite another matter entirely to express his feelings to her. His eyes were clearly narrowed at the girls as he asked, "You guys are betting on our love life? Or lack thereof?" "I think almost everyone is," Anko shrugged. "Asuma, Guy, the Hokage." Even though only one was visible, Kakashi's eyes widened in shock at this point before shaking his head, setting the cash for his meal on the counter, and getting up. He said softly, almost to himself, "I'll tell Nori when I find the right time," and then he left for the Hitaki clan compound. It wasn't big, but it wasn't small either, it was just empty and filled with memories he preferred to leave behind. With Noriko's assistance and encouragement, he had just started to tidy up the clan compound. Compared to his tiny apartment, it was a safer location to watch Naruto. Initially, that is, there had been relatively few assassination attempts over the previous 12 months. Most were too scared to do anything for fear of the Yondaimi's sister's anger. However, there had been a lot in the beginning, even when Kakashi had Naruto, so after years of avoiding it, he had finally returned home to help protect his sensei's young daughter. After battling the demons the place held, he couldn't help but feel a little lighter. He knew that the only people he could thank for that were Naruto and Noriko. Although they stayed in the Land of Fire and never really entered Nami no Kuni, the search had led them in the direction of Wave. Jiraiya's spy network claims that Tsunade was last spotted in High no Kuni. They checked in every location they passed between Konoha and the Fire Country borders, even though there weren't many. Noriko ought to have thought of starting in her timeline at the age of 12, where she had discovered Tsunade. The Kunoichi hadn't considered checking there, in actuality. How likely was it that she would discover Konoha's Slug Princess in Tanzaku Town on her second retrieval mission? Noriko had mentally chastised herself for not thinking to check there first, rather than being shocked to discover the blonde woman and her apprentice in the exact spot she had not anticipated. However, the time traveler laughed at the irony of it all. Jiraiya remarked, "Well, there she is," as they walked into one of Tanzaku's numerous casinos and bars. Noriko wasn't shocked to see that Tsunade didn't look much different from how she remembered. Perhaps a bit more haunted, if that was possible at all. In contrast to her timeline, where she had discovered the blonde Sannin in a similar circumstance, Noriko had to remind herself that Dan's passing and everything Tsunade had been fleeing from were far more recent in her memory. She quickly realized that might make things more complicated. Apart from that, she was a little taken aback by how much younger Shizune appeared in comparison to when she had first seen the black-haired woman. Compared to when Noriko was 12, even Taunton appeared much younger, a mere piglet. That made sense, though, as Tsunade was currently about 39 and Shizune was only about 15 or 16. Noriko said, "Let's get this over with," as she and her former godfather, who would still be Ero Sennin even though she couldn't really call him her godfather anymore, stood at the table. He started, doubting her sanity, but the blonde was already approaching Tsunade. "We're just going to walk up to her," he said. He rubbed his temple with a sigh, as though he was expecting a headache. By the time he reached them, Shizune was holding a baby pig in her arms and was looking warily between the two blondes, who were glaring at each other. When Tsunade finally noticed her teammate approaching from behind the teenager, she demanded, "Jiraiya, who is this girl?" Despite her eyes' color turning her off, she painfully reminded her of Kushina and Minato. Since the girl should be approaching her first birthday, not her 15th, she knew this couldn't be Kushina's daughter. "That's a complicated question, Haim, but for now I guess I'll give you the simple answer," he said. "This is Uzumaki Noriko, Minato's sister, and Kushina's cousin." Tsunade's eyes widened, switching from the black ones of the blondes to the toad sages. Trying to process what he was telling her, she asked, "Did I hear you right? did you say she's Minato's sister? And Kushina's cousin? Yes, replied Jiraiya. Like I said, it's complicated. Is there somewhere more private we can talk about this? Tsunade frowned, glanced away from the girl who was only a year younger than her apprentice, and nodded inside. She owed it to her grandmother Mito to listen to her if she was a real surviving Uzumaki. Even though the girl had been quite direct about what Konoha wanted from her. Although she understood that the girl had not intended to offend her when she informed Tsunade that the Hokage had sent her to pick her up, anything related to Konohagakure now offended her right away. The Slug Princess said, Shizune and I have a room close, we can talk there, before getting up and escorting the two out of the bar and casino. She couldn't help but believe the words, even though they sounded too fantastic to be true. The girl had features that could only belong to Minato, but she was also an exact replica of Kushina. She was able to easily pass herself off as an Uzumaki clan survivor and Minato's half-sister. Her resemblance to Kushina was easily explained by playing the role of her cousin, and her relationship to the Uchiha took care of her black eyes and Sharingan bloodline. Before utilizing the seal to transport her back in time, Noriko had given everything careful consideration. However, it was clear that the connection to the Uchiha clan was added at the last minute because Tsunade knew from her story that Noriko hadn't expected to arrive by herself or with her teammates watching. Shizune had chosen to leave them to their private conversation and was in the adjacent room with Taunton, but it still took her more than 5 minutes to process everything that had been revealed to her. She could understand why the Hokage had also sent for her. If the fourth war materialized, it sounded like it would be worse than the third. As she halted her pacing and turned to face Jiraiya and Noriko, she hoped it wouldn't happen. What exactly am I to do if, she asked, I come back to Konoha? We need a medical program for the ninja, something a little more against tradition, Noriko said. During the war one of our problems was we had few medical nin who could fight as well as heal. In other words, we need competent field medical nin that could safely fight on the front lines without being taken out before their platoon. During the war, not long before I'd become Hokage, my teammate, Sakura ran something we called the Medical Corps, which was made up of medical nin who were able to fight in the field as well. Sakura had been your apprentice as well, and Shizune also held a position in the Medical Corps helping Sakura train the ninja placed there. But it was too late to really help the war effort as much as we needed it to. Tsunade understood what she was saying and nodded. After all, she had established the official medical ninja system and the rules that both her students and other medical nin should follow. Among these were the prohibitions that no medic ninja should ever die until they were the last member of their platoon and that no field medical nin should ever be on the front lines. Tsunade understood that sometimes a medical nin needed to be able to stand on the front lines as well, but she was able to fight on the front lines by using the strength of 100, particularly during combat, while also preserving their own lives to aid their fellow soldiers. The Hokage wants you to run the hospital and the medical corps, which will be company taught by those of your choice to teach ninja interested to be both a frontlines fighter and medical nin, Jiraiya continued. She asked, anyone interested, even those still in the academy? Taking this as a positive sign, Noriko grinned a little. Noriko responded, anyone, though the academy student must be in their second or third year to be eligible. They must also show promise as a medical nin. Tsunade inhaled deeply and considered her options. She could keep running on one hand, but based on Noriko's timeline, that wouldn't last very long. However, she might be offered the opportunity to launch a program that would place a student with medical nin promise on each genin team, just like the one she had proposed a year prior. Though it was a developed concept, it held a lot of potential. Tsunade briefly closed her eyes as she considered what her younger brother and Dan might say if they were present. It goes without saying that she was aware that they would want her to take the chance, and even though going back to Konoha was painful, she would do it. For herself, if not for Minato and Kushina. Regarding Naruto and Noriko. When she finally said, I'll do it, I'll return to Konoha. Jiraiya and Noriko both grinned with relief. Naruto exclaimed joyfully, Dada, up, and Kakashi grinned. Although he initially felt a little bad, he had started to get used to Naruto calling him Dada. Naruto should have been Minato Sensei, not him, when he called him by that name, but his friends swiftly corrected him after they forced it out of him. The fact that their daughter had someone to look up to as a mother and father would have pleased Minato and Kushina. Naruto had also started speaking more than baby. Speak during the past week that Noriko had been away. Naturally, not much, but up was now fairly common. She enjoyed playing with his ninkin even more than she enjoyed being carried. Perhaps because he was more like her in size, poor Pakun seemed to be her favorite. Pakun praised his pink patted paws and said, "Cute kid, if she leaves my tail alone I'll let her touch my paws." Gazing down at the little dog from Kakashi's embrace, Naruto burst out laughing. When the child began to babble in a language that only a baby could understand, Kakashi was taken aback and reached out behind him. He was about to turn around when small hands covered his eyes. He grinned when he heard a familiar voice ask, "Guess who?" He turned around and said, "Nariko, you're back," and the hands were taken away. The shorter girl, not by much, but she had been going through a growth spurt recently, stood behind him and appeared to be glad to be back. Mostly when she was with Naruto, and sometimes when she was alone with him, he noticed a certain sparkle in her eyes. Her eyes were usually shadowed and haunted by the things she had witnessed in the past, but that's not to say they weren't beautiful when they weren't so lively. They had belonged to her based on what the eyes had previously seen. Grinning, Nariko took Naruto from Kakashi and looked back at Kakashi instead of the contented infant tugging at her long hair. Even though it took her a little time, she didn't see Kakashi the way she had the person in her timeline. She saw them as two distinct individuals, just as she and Naruto were now. Although she hadn't told him, Kakashi was more than just her friend. "How did it go?" inquired Kakashi. She said, "Better than I thought," and nodded. Tsunade agreed to return. "She's talking to Hokage. Gigi now." Kakashi swallowed as he considered what to say next and nodded. He recalled the conversation between Kurenai and Anko at the ramen stand a few days prior. Even though he wasn't quite ready to tell Nariko how he felt, he still asked her out. "So, do you want to get lunch with me?" asked he. "You and Naru?" After a moment of looking surprised, Nariko flashed her fox-like smile. She said, "Are you asking me out, Kakashi?" And he laughed while nervously rubbing the back of his neck. "I guess I am." Nariko connected her elbow with Kakashi's, Naruto safely resting on her hip. With a, "I would like that," she concluded. "How about you, Naru-chan?" The small family walked from the Hitaki compound, and Kakashi and Nariko laughed as the soon-to-be-1 year-old giggled in agreement. Go undercover. Undercover operations were the one aspect of Anbu that Nariko detested the most. They always left her missing her daughter and took an indeterminate amount of time. It was easy for her to transition from viewing Naruto as a different version of herself to her younger sister and then to her daughter after almost 2 years. In particular, since before she was a year old, the young, blonde toddler had called her mother. She was also aware that her boyfriend also considered the toddler to be his daughter. This was a significant change for him because, at first, he had only considered Naruto to be his sensei's daughter, and perhaps even a younger sister. It wasn't difficult for him to start thinking of her as his daughter after spending so much time with her during the first year. When Nariko thought of her boyfriend, she gave herself a small smile. The idea that she had found happiness with someone was still unreal. For the first time in her life, she felt content and that nothing could go wrong, which she unconsciously believed was merely a tragedy in the making. In the past, whenever she had experienced such joy, something had trampled on it and destroyed it. Among them are Madara, Akatsuki, and Orochimaru. They had been dating for a little more than 2 years, having met up around 2 months prior to Naruto's first birthday, but she was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Since then, Naruto had grown and would soon turn 3, which was one of the reasons the 17-year-old, who had already celebrated her 17th birthday on October 1st, wanted to go home after their mission. Nariko felt as though she was forgetting something, and there were rumors that Kumo was moving against Konoha. She wanted to change things, but even she was unaware of everything that had happened, particularly prior to her admission to the academy, so she wasn't overly shocked. Because of the volatile seal and the timeline's attempt to correct itself, she also realized that her memories were somewhat jumbled from the process of going back in time. However, any risk she might have faced from traveling back in time had vanished during the first year as the timeline adjusted to her presence and time corrected itself. Of course, most people found this difficult to understand, and even she had some trouble, but aside from the Hiraishin, she had never been particularly interested in space-time seals. It wasn't as though she had known the precise dates and events to alter, rather, her memories were simply hazy rather than lost. They had been in the midst of a war despite all the planning that went into the last resort plan. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't be flawless. Despite this, she remained alert and aware of the worst, particularly when they learned of Kumo's rumors. She ended up here for that reason. The goal was to sneak into the village where the rumors started in order to see if any shinobi of Kumogakure were hanging around. Nothing had surfaced in the past week, and she and Kakashi, who were posing as a young married couple, were starting to believe that nothing would. She heard Kakashi whisper something specifically for her. I wonder if maybe whoever started the rumor has already left. They were both dressed in civilian clothes. Kakashi was dressed in a long, sleeved black sweater, pants, and a seal she had made that functioned similarly to a henge but that only an Uzumaki or the one it was keyed to could dispel. His dark green eyes, pale skin, and longish, spiky dark brown hair gave him the appearance of a handsome young adult. She was dressed in a delicate blue kimono with swirling flower patterns on the sleeves and a silver obi. She pretended to be a curvy young adult with amber eyes, tan skin, and long, wavy black hair. Neither appeared out of place. They both fit in perfectly with the mission at hand. After letting out a sigh and shaking her head, Noriko responded, "I don't know, we've been here 2 weeks and no signs of anything. If it was a Kumo ninja, it's possible they were passing through. We shinobi do get missions that take us to other countries." "True," said Kakashi as he and Noriko paused in front of a bookshop. "Come on, let's look around inside." Before she saw what her boyfriend saw, Nori stared at him, nearly in disbelief. There was a man inside the store, but his demeanor revealed that he was not just a bad actor but also a ninja. She grinned and said, "Sure, I wanted to look around for a gift for Naru's birthday anyway." The couple remained close to one another, but they gradually drifted apart in a convincing way while browsing, covertly keeping their suspect in view. As Noriko perused a children's book of fairy tales, she started to question whether they had aired. She doubted that the man was above Chunin rank because he was barely older than them and didn't appear to be trying to act undercover. She assumed that he was either really terrible at acting or wasn't trying to hide at all. Noriko picked up a book about flowers and their meanings and started to look through the pages while pretending to be interested in the material. Honestly, based on what she could read, it wasn't that bad. When two ninja entered the store and called out to the one she and Kakashi had been observing a few seconds later, she nearly jumped. The headbands came from the small village of Hoshigakure, she sighed. She saw the man's forehead protector when he joined his teammates. The metal plate was worn over his heart and fastened to the inside of his jacket, which briefly flared open. It was likely intended as a defense for weapons aimed there, but it was also a dumb place if he wanted immediate recognition. She closed the book she was holding and turned to face Kakashi. When she arrived, she froze, blinked to make sure she wasn't seeing things, and then fixed her gaze on the orange book that appeared to be being read by her boyfriend. Indeed, she was certain that he had recognized the one they believed to be from Kumogakure, but he had been captivated by the smut he now possessed after it was revealed to be a Hoshigakure shinobi. Trying to stay true to herself, she said, What are you reading, dear?" After blinking, Kakashi slowly looked up from the book. Even though it was covered up at the moment, the blank expression on her face did not look good for him. "Just reading, it's surprisingly interesting." It was not the cackles that indicated he had done something without realizing it that evoked the Uzumaki wrath, but rather her laughter that almost gave him a heart attack. She found it amusing. "I should have known it was only a matter of time. Nice try, but I'm aware what that smut is," she said as she turned. "Come on, we should head back to the apartment. I think we've overstayed our needs." He followed her to the checkout counter and asked, "Seriously? You don't care that if I read Icha Icha?" "As long as you're not reading it to Naru-chan, I don't mind," she said, purchasing her own book, which was surprisingly engaging for a book about the meaning of flowers. She turned slightly and gave him a sly smile. "Besides, you might learn something new and fun from it. Ha. Ha." As Kakashi watched his closest friend, lover, and Anbu partner leave, his mouth fell open. His voice trailed off as he muttered, "Did she just?" As he walked out, he could hardly hear the store clerk murmur, "Lucky bastard." Going home was the best part of her job. The most satisfying moment was when she managed to return before a birthday or holiday. However, because long-term missions left Naruto alone, she had never enjoyed them. It was a drawback of Anbu because, depending on their severity, Anbu missions could last for years, in contrast to Chunin or Jonin, who hardly ever received long-term missions lasting more than a week or two. She was fortunate to be able to limit the lengthy missions to no more than 3 weeks. That's just the way she was. Perhaps a little more focused on maintaining her career and spending as much time at home with Naru as possible. She also believed that the Sandaime was supporting her and Kakashi because they had Naruto to look after. However, Kunoichi rarely remained ninja for very long after getting married, particularly after having kids. Fortunately, she had Makoto, who always enjoyed watching Naruto. She had grown to regard Makoto as an older sister over the past few years, and Makoto appeared to reciprocate. Sasuke and Itachi had even started referring to her as Aunt or Oba-chan. At first, it seemed unreal to see Itachi and Sasuke growing up and recalling their potential future selves, but now she didn't even recognize the two children who called her aunt as the Itachi and Sasuke of her timeline. As Kakashi approached her from behind, he said, "Naru's friends are out back getting pretty impatient. The cake ready. I don't know how long we have until they start a riot." With a laugh, Nariko completed writing Naruto's name in thick orange frosting. The cake was lovely, if not flawless, for their daughter, and Kakashi had to give his girlfriend the credit for it. The icing had white edges and was light blue. The "Happy Birthday Naruto" section was in vivid orange, and a picture of a bowl of ramen, with a Naruto topping, to his amusement, was shown in white, yellow, which hardly looked yellow, orange, and red for the swirl in the Naruto topping. She had likely spent hours carefully working on it. "Yes, help me get it to the table. I'll carry the ice cream and bowls," she replied. After giving her a quick kiss and nodding, Kakashi picked up the cake and left through the back door. Nariko rolled her eyes at the kiss. She wouldn't have realized the mask hadn't been taken off if she weren't so accustomed to it. Of course, she had seen his face. She had never seen his face in her reality, not even after he died in the Fourth War, and she had not wanted to remember the man she had known as He-sensei in that way when she had almost fainted the first time. Most of all, it was out of respect. All of this might seem strange if she thought Kakashi was the same person who had trained her, but she didn't, so it wasn't. But all of this was irrelevant. Even at home, Kakashi hardly ever removed the mask. She hadn't expected it to come off, but there was no way it was happening with the kids out in the backcountry for Naru's party. When there were just the three of them, he would most likely remove it. He wore it so frequently and for so long that he frequently forgot he was wearing it, which was the main reason he hardly ever took it off at home. Even in her timeline, she had always questioned why Kakashi wore his mask. Most people thought it was a clan custom. The Hitaki clan, which was once much larger, had always worn masks similar to Kakashi's on missions. However, few people engaged in it for almost all of the day. However, like Kakashi, some people wore it, only showing their faces to spouses, lovers, or family members in general. In addition to following in his father's footsteps, who wore his mask exclusively on missions, Kakashi had adopted it after his father's death. He did it primarily to avoid being reminded of his father's face in the mirror every morning after his father passed away. Despite his mother's slightly softer features, he still bore a striking resemblance to his father. She was aware of this from photos she had seen of the White Fang and his wife. Obito would only ever remove his mask to sleep, eat, if he was home, and take a shower before he realized how heroic his father was for his actions during the mission that destroyed his career. After just a few months of dating, Nariko was utterly shocked and moved when Kakashi revealed this to her. However, she had received the condensed version when she first saw his face, almost a week after their first date, during their first kiss. "Ka-chan, what took ya so long, Tt Ibeo?" The reason Nariko smiled was because her thoughts had been so deep that she had not realized until now that she had taken the bowls and ice cream and left the kitchen. That was another funny surprise, Dadbeo. Nariko had hoped Naru wouldn't become verbally ticky, but her hopes were as fruitless as Kushina's. The fact that Nariko and Kushina had grown up saying Dadabane, while Naru-chan had said Dadbeo, had taken her by surprise. Though Dadbeo was the more common male variant, they essentially meant the same thing. Naruto was more of a tomboy than she was at 3, so she shouldn't be shocked by that. By the time she graduated from the academy, she would eventually see the more feminine side, just as Nori had. From Tales of the Woman, Kushina had remained the same. Naru wore 2 small bunny hair clips in her sunny blonde hair, which kept the left side more submissive even though her short hair didn't necessarily require them. However, she wasn't a total tomboy. Nariko was aware that her daughter was just using it as a pretext to sport a pretty hairpin, regardless of how girly it was. It only served to highlight the fact that she and Naruto were 2 entirely different individuals. She suspected that, even in terms of biology, their DNA wouldn't match, with the Uchiha's DNA fused to her own so that she could use the Sharingan eyes Sasuke had given her just like any other Uchiha would. "Sorry, I got lost in thought," Nariko said, causing Naruto's hair to become even more unkempt and spiky than usual. Even with her hair cut that short, she couldn't recall ever having such spiky hair when she was younger. The others laughed at the birthday girl's misfortune as she attempted, without success, to smooth her neck length hair down. Even though Naruto had a few friends, not many children or adults showed up for her party, which made Nariko very proud and happy. The young girl chose to ignore it as best she could and still made friends, even though there were many people in the village who would condemn her and Naruto for even existing. The reason Noriko raised Naru was to give her the childhood she herself was never given, even though it was more than she could say for her own. Ino, the daughter of Inoichi, Shikamaru, the son of Shikaku, and Choji, the son of Choza, were present. While Fugaku was working with the rest of the police force, Shiba brought his son Shino, Sume's boy Kiba, Hinata, Hitomi's daughter, and Makoto brought Itachi and Sasuke. At first, she had to remind herself that her daughter's friends weren't her friends and comrades, and if she had her way, they would never be the same people. She had known almost half of the Rookie 9. In all honesty, Noriko's arrival and Naru's influence altered them as much as time itself. However, when Naruto excitedly introduced her to her new friends one day at the playground, she was honestly utterly dumbfounded. She was taken aback to see so many Rookie 9 at 3, but she quickly composed herself and grinned broadly. But she'd had time to get used to it. The children all roared with excitement when Nori asked, "Who wants cake and ice cream?" Noriko served the cake and ice cream with assistance from Makoto, Sume, and Hitomi. Sume remarked, "I don't know where you find the time for all this," as the children all engaged in conversation and eating while the adults gathered to the side. "Kage Bunshin is a great help," acknowledged Noriko. Kakashi approached her side and put an arm around her waist, asking, "What about me?" "What about you?" Nori asked mischievously as she looked up at the man with the silver hair. When Noriko noticed the light pout beneath his mask, she joined in on the women's laughter. She had developed the ability to read her lover's emotions, even when they were hidden because she was worried about them. Noriko put her hand on Kakashi-kun's cheek and grinned, saying, "I'm teasing Kakashi-kun. You're a great help. I couldn't do it without you." Shikaku Nara muttered, "Troublesome," and when Yoshino, Shikaku's wife, gave him a playful slap on the back of the head, there were snorts of laughter. Makoto grinned at her cousin, a blonde, whom she perceived more as a younger sister. "So, are we gonna see more little Norikos or Kakashis running around soon?" she asked, her black eyes mischievous. Makoto recalled that she hadn't been much older when she had Itachi. The faces of Kakashi and Noriko went pale, and she laughed. Noriko said, "No, not anytime soon," after she was able to speak again. Since they had been dating for years, she and Kakashi were obviously intimate, but they were always extremely cautious. They had to be because, as the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, she was susceptible to pregnancy during certain hot spells if they weren't careful. A consequence of having a giant demon fox lodged in her stomach. She said, "Great," as she glanced up at her boyfriend. "I think you broke him, Koto, Nichan." Indeed, Kakashi continued to gaze with wide eyes and lighter than normal skin. After a month, Hitaki clan substance. When Itachi said, "Noriko, Obeken, Imouto and Otouto are fighting again," the older, dark-eyed woman turned to face him. With a sigh, Noriko turned to face behind her and turned off the water in the kitchen sink. Sasuke and Itachi were good kids, so she didn't mind watching them, but if they were together for too long, it was a sign of trouble. Using a dish towel to wipe her hands, she said, "Thank you, Tachi-chan, I'll take care of it, come on, after I separate them we can watch a movie." Grinning, Itachi went into the living room where Sasuke and Naruto were grappling on the floor, followed by his honorary aunt. Because they were becoming so tangled, it was difficult to determine which limb belonged to whom. Since they hadn't heeded her first two warnings, she activated her Sharingan to demonstrate her seriousness. She then grabbed them by the back collar of their shirts and yanked them violently apart. "Huh. Oka. Chan/Oba.Chan. They both declared, gazing up into red eyes with a mixture of astonishment and trepidation. She said sharply, "That's enough, I won't say it again you two," and she released their shirts. They pointed to one another and yelled, he started it." At his honorary sister and younger brother, Itachi shook his head. The 8-year-old's rather stoic expression hardly changed as he thought, "They never learned." Folding her arms across her chest, Noriko snorted. She gave a small glare before turning off her Sharingan and grinning subtly. "I don't care, I'm stopping it," she said. "Come on you two, you can watch a movie with me and Itachi. If you're good maybe we'll have ice cream for dessert tonight." This made Sasuke and Naruto excited, and they rushed to take a seat on the couch. Itachi grinned at their naive antics and trailed behind them, while Noriko laughed as she did the same. It struck her like a ton of bricks in early January. What brought it to the forefront of her mind was hearing about the Kumo representative and witnessing his arrival. She found it hard to believe that she had almost forgotten, but then again, she had never been certain of the precise time of Hinata's abduction. Neither of the Hyuga wanted to discuss that aspect of their history in great detail. It was the start of the end. She had the opportunity to stop it now. The only challenge was determining the precise moment and preventing the death of the Kumo representative. She also realized that perhaps the rumors she and Kakashi had looked into in late September and early October weren't just unfounded. She was certain that there was a connection even though there was no concrete proof. Now that she had pointed it out to the Hokage, she could sleep a little better knowing that he was keeping a closer eye on the representative. When Root was working with you rather than against you, it was almost surprising how helpful it could be. In order to protect the Hyuga compound, she herself requested to be paired with a Root agent. It was already heavily guarded by clan members, and the Byakugan could not get away with much. With the correct methods, it was feasible, but only at the proper distance. Fortunately, she had collaborated with two of the most gifted Hyuga in her timeline, so she was well versed in the dojutsu, which was kept secret from her. The fact that the Root Anbu assigned to protect the Hyuga with her was a Hyuga, likely a bastard child. That they were unaware had been born was only a minor surprise. Given the scarcity of females, she wouldn't rule out Danzo assigning his Root to seduction missions in the past for this exact reason. She still assumed it was just a case of kidnapping because of what remained of the most Hyuga. In the end, the child was most likely regarded as dead. As sad as it was to say, they were more likely to forget about them, so it was probably a branch member. She couldn't help but imagine the reactions of the Hyuga elders and some of the main house members if they found out that their lineage wasn't as protected as they believed. To be honest, she thought the caged bird seal was a glorified slavery band. Any bloodline thief who was aware of the caged bird seal would know that, if they could take samples before the seal killed him, they would get the best results from taking even a sealed Hyuga male alive. Hell, the purpose of seduction missions was precisely that. However, it is rarely used anymore because many kunoichi did not want to have a child that they would probably not be able to raise. Having a child as a mission was not something they desired either. All of this led her to question why the representative pursued Hinata, aside from the fact that she wasn't sealed. The Root Anbu said, Neko.san, gesturing to the movement and cautiously scaling shadows on the compound walls. With her eyes slowly spinning in the shape of her Sharingan, she arched an eyebrow behind her Anbu mask. She rarely used it otherwise because it was easier to see at the distance they were at when it was turned on. She thought it would be dishonorable to not use Sasuke's final gift to her, but it reminded her of a past life that was better left behind. She had accepted it over the years and now cherished it rather than viewing it as a painful reminder. She said, "Looks like it's time," in a tone that was almost emotionless. "Our next move? We move in. Once he's cleared the wall, I'll trap him in a genjutsu. I'll secure the girl. You render the Kumo.nin unconscious." After receiving a nod from the Root Anbu, the two departed and sprinted in the direction of the location where the kidnapper was likely to flee. As they hid to either side, Noriko expressed gratitude for having improved her chakra control over the years of practice and for having rediscovered that genjutsu was something she could truly do in the years since her arrival. It was made even simpler by the Sharingan. While the Kumo.nin returned over the wall with a sack slung over his shoulder, she whispered, "Megan. Kokoni Erizu no Jutsu, demonic illusion. False surroundings technique." The man's eyes appeared to glaze over as he struck the ground. Whatever he saw wasn't them. The Root Anbu rendered the man unconscious with what seemed to be a pressure point or a tenketsu strike, and Nori grabbed the girl who screamed and struggled inside the bag, so he had no chance. She didn't listen because she was too busy extracting the Hyuga air from the bag. Too short to reach her waist yet, Hinata clung to her leg and sobbed. In an attempt to console her, Noriko smoothed her dark hair down. She understood that her kidnapping would still be traumatic even if they had stopped it just a minute after it started. A few seconds after the Root Anbu and the Kumo ambassador left to go to the Hokage's office to give the shinobi to T&I, she turned to see Hyuga Heishi speaking in a somewhat hysterical tone. Although he appeared relieved to see his daughter who almost rushed into her father's arms, Heishi asked more demandingly than he asked, "Anbu-san, where is the kidnapper?" Noriko nodded slightly and said, "Taken care of, you don't need to worry about him again," before saying goodbye and avoiding the Hokage's office. The Root Anbu was gone when she got there, and the Kumo shinobi was already in T&I. Noriko gave the Sandaime her mission report and they started discussing the next steps. She was glad that she had prevented Hizashi from having to make a sacrifice that he shouldn't have had to. The Hyuga affair had been resolved with Kumo 2 months earlier. In the broadest sense, they would be friendly, but at the moment, the Sandaime Raikage has rejected a genuine alliance between the two villages, just as he has denied any role in the attempted kidnapping of the Hyuga. Finally backed into a corner, the Raikage made amends for his shinobi's judgment by giving the ambassador to the Hyuga clan. Once the ambassador was turned over, it was not surprising that the Hyuga put him to death. Noriko was forced to acknowledge that the Sandaime Raikage was a cunning man who could shift all the blame onto his shinobi while simultaneously tying up loose ends because she was certain he knew the Kumo.nin would be killed. Unfortunately, despite T and I's efforts, the shinobi remained silent. What they did say was generally circumstantial, and it wasn't out of the ordinary for cages of foreign villages to attempt to abduct heirs of prestigious clans or bloodline clans. It wasn't surprising that Kumo tried to spirit Uzumaki Kushina away to Kumo with a Hyuga again, as he had done so years earlier. Since the Kumo.nin was put to death and Kumogakure apologized for their man's poor decision, the issue was, in any event, resolved. Nobody was duped, but they had prevented the two villages from going to war, which would have happened if things had gotten out of hand. In order to refute allegations that they had sent anyone to kidnap Hinata, the Hokage had been compelled to comply with Kumo's demands in her timeline for a Hyuga for the man Heishi had killed, leading to Hizashi's demise in her chronology. After 2 months, everything had returned to normal for everyone. She had chosen to spend one of her few weekends off from work with Naru and the Uchiha, primarily Makoto and her family. Even though she had a good number of close friends in the Uchiha clan, many of them, mostly the older, more traditional ones, still viewed her as somewhat of an outsider. However, they all had some respect for her, which was likely influenced by her family history and her role in Konoha's shinobi forces. Not all clans could claim to be related to the family of the 4th Hokage. Makoto pulled her out of her reverie with the words, "I heard you were injured on your last mission," and Nori's eye twitched just enough to be noticed. She questioned, "Who told you that?" Makoto smirked faintly and snorted lightly, asking, "Who do you think? Your boyfriend mentioned it when I ran into him picking up ramen the other day." Noriko shook her head and rolled her eyes. "It was nothing." With a dry remark, Makoto said, "You were stabbed." "In the shoulder," shrugged Noriko. "It was a flesh wound at best. It's healed already. Hardly anything to freak out about." Makoto chuckled. "Not everyone heals at such an inhuman rate, Nori-chan. Added to the fact you hardly get hurt on missions, I can see why Kakashi was worried." "I know, but it's bound to happen. I'm not invincible." Makoto nodded and got up to stir the sauce and remove the pasta from the stove. Although it was unlikely because simple bandits posed little threat to experienced shinobi, the more of them there were, the more likely it was that an injury would occur. She was relieved that Noriko was okay, as she had been shocked to learn that she had been hurt. Makoto did realize how human her cousin was, though, because Noriko was one of the strongest people she knew, both mentally and physically. Nevertheless, she would always be appreciative of Nori's Uzumaki ancestry and the associated healing. "Kakashi should be here soon," Noriko said softly as she glanced at the wall clock. It was about 3 hours late, or so. Makoto got some plates out of the cabinet and said, "HN, will you go get the kids while I set the table?" Noriko nodded, got to her feet, and went to the back where she could hear Itachi, Naru, and Sasuke. The former two were pleading with Itachi to demonstrate some ninja techniques for them. If the fire damage and the smell of burnt wood were any indication, the boy had clearly demonstrated some fire jutsu and had apparently given in. Naru was now running up the trees, as she had seen other ninjas do, and begging Itachi to give her a ride on his back. Seeing how things had worked out, Noriko grinned. Despite all the danger involved in completing and utilizing the time travel seal, the sacrifice she had made by not knowing exactly what had happened to her timeline, as well as the deaths of her teammates and numerous other allies. It was all worthwhile because she would ensure that her new home's future was better than her own. After 2 years, Sato no Konohagakure, dare she say it, things became almost peaceful after the Hyuga affair. While she was training a new recruit to replace her as the Neko Anbu, she and Kakashi continued their missions. She could hardly remember Izuki Yugo from the original timeline. She was only 15 years old as of November. It was only April at the time, so Yugo was only 14, a few years younger than her now. In her timelines, she was fairly certain that Yugo had previously been in Anbu, but since she had been promoted to Neko Anbu, the timeline had changed, and she hadn't been recruited until just before Noriko made the decision to leave Anbu and join the Jonin. She remembered that Yugo had been one of the best Kenjutsu masters in Konoha, had trained under Kakashi for years, and had been a proficient Anbu captain. Additionally, she was engaged to Gekko Hayate, who passed away at the age of 12 or almost 13 during the Chunin exams. A few years later, during the Fourth War, Yugo had passed away. She had never met her before, but she couldn't imagine a better candidate to replace her at Anbu. While training an Anbu potential to wear their mask after leaving the organization wasn't a common practice, it wasn't unheard of either. Surprisingly, Nori was unaware that Yugo had been the Neko Anbu in the original timeline until she saw the purple-haired girl with her boyfriend, Hayate, a few days into her training. She only knew that Yugo had been Anbu for a lot longer before she returned and made the changes she had to the timeline, but she had no idea how things had turned out in the original timeline. As far as changes go, she assumed it wasn't all that bad because it allowed Yugo to enjoy her childhood more before joining the Anbu, which was far more dangerous and demanding than simply being a shinobi. She still had a month or two to prepare Yugo for her new responsibilities as cat and retire from Anbu. She was okay with Kakashi continuing to serve in Anbu. Additionally, he backed her decision to leave Anbu, particularly since Naru would be starting the Ninja Academy in a few months. She decided to wait another year because she wanted her daughter to have one last year before she began to devote more and more of her time to training rather than her childhood, even though it was a year later than she remembered entering. Nevertheless, aside from Hinata, who she remembered also had a late birthday, Naru would be the youngest student in her class. A few weeks after she started the academy, Naruto would turn 5. Noriko recalled that she had been admitted a month after turning 4. She was a latecomer who was only permitted to do so with the Hokage's approval. Since she would have been 3 years old and much younger at that time, the Hokage had not wanted to enroll her before the start of the new year in September. The difference between clan children and civilian children was that, typically, 3-year-olds could hardly clean their own ass, much less learn how to be a shinobi. The need to care for herself because no one else would do it for her allowed even the so-called clanless orphan to become more self-reliant. It wasn't as unbelievable as it might have seemed to a civilian because Kakashi had also been 4 when he started the academy and 3 just a week before his birthday in September. She was assigned to a class with the Rookie 9, who, aside from Team Guy, would start classes this coming year. Because she chose to wait a year, Naruto would also avoid having to deal with her first failed Genin exam this year. It was up to Naruto if he ever attempted to graduate early. With all of her friends in the same class as her, she didn't think Naru would want to. She didn't have the same friendships with the Rookie 9 as her daughter did when she was Naru's age. With a shameful glance down, Yugo said, "Sensei, I apologize for being late. I sharpening my katana, and I lost track of time." With a start, Noriko's thoughts caused her to frown slightly as she glanced at her student. Yugo was only 5 minutes late, but she hadn't even realized it. She remarked, "Try to keep better track of the time, Yugo, but it's alright. I've seen worse, believe me," recalling how frequently her boyfriend was late for everything and how the length of the wait depended on its importance. Nori smiled and drew her own katana as Yugo nodded. Shining in the sunlight, it had belonged to her mother. When Noriko said, "Now, let's see if the time spent sharpening your sword was worth it," Yugo produced her own katana and lowered herself into a stance. Yugo took the initiative and advanced on Noriko at a remarkable rate. September Sato no Konohagakure, Academy of Shinobi. "Hello, Hiroshi. Sensei," Nori said as she accompanied Naru to the academy for her second day. Naruto and Noriko made an agreement. She would accompany Naru to class during the first week, and they would go to Ichiraku's for ramen after school. Like the other parents, she would pick Naruto up from school and let her complete the journey alone after the first week. Depending on who had the time and wasn't preoccupied, Kakashi might do it. "Namikaze. Heim," he said courteously, one of the few who had no issue with the fourth and trusted her sealing work. If anything, Minato was more inspirational to him because she was his sister. As the class watched her mother welcome their teacher, for the time being at least, some of them staring at her, Naruto's face flushed. Most likely due to their striking similarity in appearance. Although their hair was identical, hers was even more unkempt and spiky. Possibly as a result of her wearing it short. It was also devoid of the red highlights that her mother had. It seems that the red highlights she had in her hair had faded as she grew older, leaving her naturally blonde hair looking brighter and more golden. She was slightly darker than her mother, but not by much, and they shared the same whisker-like birthmarks. The primary distinction between them was the color of their eyes. Her mother had stunning black eyes that were only slightly different from the pupil, and that was only if you looked closely in bright light. Frequent among the Uchiha clan. Naruto lowered herself a bit in her seat. Her mother wore a headband around her neck, but for once she was dressed casually. She was dressed in a thin, strapped, dark orange dress with a white Uzumaki spiral on the back and a sleeveless, high-collared white shirt. Her mother was always wearing orange in one form or another. Orange, along with yellow and crimson, was an awesome color, and Naru couldn't argue. As she concluded her talk with Hiroshi, whom she vaguely remembered from her own academy days, Noriko waved her daughter off. Before Iruka Sensei, he was the only one who had treated her fairly, putting aside the Kyuubi. As she walked out of the academy and classroom, she silently laughed at Naru's embarrassed look, in order to change into more ninja appropriate attire and meet Yugo for training. She had to go to the nearest grocery store before returning home. The next week was pretty standard. In between all of this, she would get up early, prepare Naruto's bento, drive her to school, pick her up if she was free. Otherwise, Makoto or Kakashi would do it, and train Yugo. Yugo picked up the skills quickly and adapted to Kenjutsu effortlessly. Having Hayate as a boyfriend also helped, as she received training from him in the art. Her Genjutsu was impressive as well, but her ninjutsu was merely mediocre and her taijutsu was slightly below average, for at least a chunin. When Noriko started training Yugo, she addressed each of these shortcomings, and she had been getting better ever since. Regretfully, Yugo would never be able to specialize in either ninjutsu or taijutsu, despite teaching her how to do so and assisting her with her chakra affinity. Nevertheless, her kenjutsu, genjutsu, and chakra control compensated for this. Good, Yugo, but you have to be a little more free when it comes to water jutsu, Noriko said, recalling Sakura's explanation of the water affinity. Although she had affinities for fire, wind, and lightning, she was still able to use Suidan jutsu, just not in the same way as someone who had an affinity. Regretfully, Yugo had a secondary earth affinity and a Suidan affinity. She would learn about the two worst affinities from Noriko. With earth jutsu, she had no chance at all. She could barely get the lowest ranked ones to form at all. Yugo gasped, and Noriko passed through the hand seals again. She said, "Watch again," to Yugo. Suidan. Suiryudan no Jutsu, water release, water dragon bullet technique. The water from the lake rose up again as she shaped the chakra. As Yugo watched intently, she turned to look at her sensei after hearing a faint gasp and seeing the blonde start to sway. It wouldn't have occurred to someone who wasn't trained to notice the little things. The blonde started to fall, losing consciousness as she went, and the water dragon splashed back into the lake. Sensei. Just 10 years prior, Hiroshi, a retired Jonin, had served in the Second War, toward the end, and the third. He discovered he enjoyed his current position. He had saved a good amount of money from mission pay over the years, and the salary was respectable. He stopped going on missions unless the Hokage himself asked him to, in contrast to some other Chunin teachers. He had seen and experienced a great deal in his 50.2 years of life. He could still clearly recall every battle, but most notably the October 10th Kyuubi attack. He had no animosity toward the Namakazes or Uzumakis, depending on who was asked, despite the fact that they identified themselves as Uzumaki, in contrast to many of the villagers. He had every reason to believe that the attack had claimed the life of his oldest daughter, Eri. She had been a civilian, which was sad. Although he knew Noriko and Naruto Uzumaki weren't the fox, Hiroshi still blamed it. He was aware of that prior to meeting either of them. He was still taken aback by how much they resembled Uzumaki Kushina, but he shouldn't have been because they were cousins, and he could see that Minato Namikaze looked like him. Naru's mother's Namikaze blood was clearly the source of her blonde hair and blue eyes. Hiroshi was not easily startled by anything he had seen in his life, but he was taken aback when an Anbu wearing a deer mask showed up. Sorry to interrupt, but Hokage. Sama request Uzumaki Naruto in his office. Hiroshi gestured for Naru to leave after nodding. The Anbu knocked on the door of the Hokage's office a short while later. Come in, Hiruzen called, and Naruto followed a few seconds later to find her father there, looking just as perplexed as she did. Naru said, Gigi, what's up? With a sigh, Hiruzen took his pipe away. Kakashi pointed out that was never a good sign. It's about your mother, Naru-chan. Kakashi's visible eye widened as Naruto's head snapped up, eyes wide. Kakashi asked with concern in his voice, Noriko? Is she alright? Did something happen? Naru said in a low, worried voice, Is Mama okay? Still unsure of what might have happened, she was glancing from her father to the Hokage. Not even her mother was on a mission. Nothing life-threatening. She fainted during training with her student today. She's currently at the hospital. They'll be able to tell you more. Tsunade's already with her. Naru sighed with relief as Kakashi nodded. She asked, her eyes glimmering with hope and what appeared to be unshed tears of concern, Can we go see her now? With a nod, Hiruzen waved them away, unwilling to keep them waiting any longer. They were going to be taken by surprise if Tsunade's report was accurate, which he was certain was. Noriko awoke in a sewer, a familiar place. A deep, nearly growling voice said, Finally. I've been trying to pull you into the seal for days, as she stood. She grinned as she saw the Kyuubi no Yoko for the first time in 5 years. Kurama, she said. I'm glad you're here. I was beginning to worry something was wrong. Then Kurama shrugged, like a fox. I was simply asleep, like a chakra exhaustion-induced coma. It took more out of me than I thought getting us back here. That's not the entire reason I needed to speak with you. As she looked more closely at Kurama's cage, Noriko tipped her head and furrowed her brow. She said, is your cage smaller, or is it just me? And Kurama rolled his eyes and growled. You've been careless, Kit, or maybe you've settled down. I don't know, I just woke up with it like this, he said. Do you know you're pregnant? After staring at him indifferently for a few seconds, Noriko's feet began to wobble, but she managed to keep herself from passing out from the shocking and uninteresting news. As she tried to figure out how that could have happened, she asked, I'm what? She was aware of the possibility, but they had always exercised caution. However, these things could occur, and it was unexpected rather than bad news. Pregnant, with Spawn. Noriko gave an eye roll. When she said, let's not call my baby a Spawn, Kurama-kun, the fox snorted. Fine then, the kid. I'd say from my cage's reduced size and what I remember from when Kushina was pregnant with you. You're about a month, maybe 3. You'll have to ask whatever doctor is looking at you. With her hands on her hips and the fox laughing, Noriko said, wait, did you cause me to faint earlier? Kurama continued after noticing her worried expression. No, that was from you using too much chakra while pregnant. Probably as close to chakra exhaustion that you'll ever get, he said. Don't worry, your kid is fine. You simply overexerted yourself and so you fainted. Now, explain to me what's been done in the last 5 years, Kurama said, as Noriko sighed. As the seal tag reappeared on Kyuubi as an ankle cuff, which Kurama claimed was preferable to a pet collar, Noriko opened the gate while turning to face Kurama. Kurama arched an eyebrow as she trailed off. There isn't an extreme lot to tell. After arriving I found myself faced with my parents, younger self, and your younger self. My younger self, you say, Kurama said, his features displaying a contemplative expression. She said worriedly, yeah. Why is that a problem? I mean, you're here and I know the seal on Naru. Chan is still as locked as the day it was formed. Not necessarily, I just hadn't expected my younger self to be around. I had assumed, because I am a Biju, and don't have a soul in the same sense as humans do. Not to say I don't have a soul, it just differs from a mortal soul. That my younger self would be absorbed into your seal and merge with myself. Well, maybe since you do have a soul, like with the case of me and Naru coexisting, your souls have changed and don't register as the same soul anymore. Kurama nodded and grunted. Since his time spent sealed in Mito and even Kushina, he had undergone significant change. He would not have to worry about Naruto being accepted by the other Kyuubi in the future if Noriko, and he knew that her name change had been planned before his coma upon arriving in this timeline, was correct. Even so, their souls would remain distinct, and the worst scenario would be for the younger Kyuubi to merge with himself. Though unlikely, it is possible. Only the elderly man, the Rakudo Sennin, could truly tell with certainty that he was positive. The Kyuubi muttered, meh, time travel just gives me a big headache. I take it you weren't able to save Kushina and that blonde meat bag. Noriko gave a snort. Kurama hated her father for locking him away once more, regardless of how much he had changed from his more hateful days. Kurama didn't have to like him, even though he could understand why he had. Perhaps, Noriko thought to herself, it might have something to do with her childhood, or lack thereof. She couldn't hold her parents, especially her father, responsible for all of the difficult times she had as a child, but Kurama could with bias. The 9-tailed fox would never acknowledge it, even if it were true. No, I was too late to save them. They sealed your other self into my younger self, and history repeated itself. I was taken to the hospital. Time traveling hurts more than one would think, my friend. Kurama gave a snort. Tell me about it, Kit. After I woke I talked to the Sandaime as planned, and told him the truth. He had a hard time believing it at first, I think, but I look so much like my parents, the Shikifu Jin, and of course the picture of Team 7 I carry seemed to convince him. I gave him the cover story, and I adopted Naruto, Chan myself. Kurama gave a nod. Good, at least the littler Kit has someone to take care of her. When Noriko thought of her boyfriend, her face flushed. Yes, publicly Naruto is my biological daughter, and the reason Minato never revealed his younger sister to the village. I met up with Kakashi again. But of course he was different, he was younger. Kurama chuckled. Why am I not surprised you fell in love with your sensei's past self? Noriko sulked. I didn't do it on purpose, but we worked close together in Anbu. Things just happened. He's become a great father to Naruto as well. I hope he takes the news about the baby well. Kurama shrugged and Noriko rolled her eyes. I'm sure the white meat bag will be ecstatic. Otherwise you can summon me and I'll eat him for you, she said. Don't you have any other insults besides meat bag? Why fix what is not broken? Noriko let out a sigh. Returning to his serious tone, Kurama inquired, now, did you do anything else in 5 years besides start a little family and join Anbu? Of course. I exposed Orochimaru sooner and drove him away from Konoha, saving Anko some pain. I was also able to see Sasuke and Itachi again, even if they were young at the time. Because of my Uchiha roots through Makoto's cousin, Uchiha Kota, and my connection to Minato and Kushina, they welcomed me easier than some of the Uchiha clan and villagers. I actually hadn't planned on getting so close to the clan. I didn't think being a Uchiha born outside Konoha would give me much of a chance to get to know any of them. The majority actually aren't as insane as the minority is prone to going. My only concern is trying to stop the massacre. It won't be easy. I'm not sure if I even can. Kurama gave a nod. They walk a fine line between love and hate, Noriko. A line you should understand now that you have the eyes of Uchiha. Not to mention the DNA, which you do have thanks to the jutsu that Uchiha brat used to swap your eyes. I should know. I did help them settle in better. She rambled, Uchiha DNA. Does that mean the baby will? But Kurama understood her question. He gave a headshake. Unlikely. The DNA isn't something you were naturally born with. The chances are less than 1 in 1,000, possible, but unlikely. Only time will really tell. But I'm a Biju, what do I know? With a slight twitch at the half answer, she nodded. He was not sufficiently knowledgeable about DNA to determine whether it was inheritable, but he was enough to assist her eyes in settling after Sasuke's jutsu to switch their eyes. Figure it out. Anyways, 3 years ago I was able to interfere in the Hyuga affair, stopping Hinata's kidnapping before Hiashi and preventing the death of the Kumo ambassador, and in the end Neji's father never died. When Kurama muttered, here's to hoping that'll pull that fate stick he had rammed up his ass in our timeline out, Noriko laughed. She had missed the overgrown rabbit-eared fox, so it was wonderful to see Kurama in his former form. When Noriko awoke, the hospital's white walls, floors, and other features were all there. I hate being cooped up in a hospital, she moaned. Tsunade remarked, I see you're awake, laughing at Noriko's persistent distaste for medical facilities. You had your student worried, Nori. She said, sorry, is Yugo okay? She was here until a few minutes ago. She had to go meet up with Hayate. She said she'd come back later to see you, she explained. Now, how are you feeling? With a fine. Noriko sat up. Good. Kakashi and Naruto will be here soon, I imagine, she replied. But until then, I do have to talk to you. Nori said, okay, and Tsunade nodded while glancing at the clipboard in her hand. I don't know if you're aware of this, Nori-chan. Considering you haven't come in, I doubt you do, but you're pregnant. She was not as surprised as Tsunade had thought she would be. Rather, she simply smiled. I know. I mean I didn't, but while I was out I was pulled into the seal by Kurama. He let me know I was pregnant. Still unaccustomed to the notion that the Kyuubi had a name, Tsunade blinked. She knew that Noriko trusted the Kyuubi, so she didn't bother to inquire about the seal's well-being or whether there was anything to be concerned about because the fox was awake. Since her return to Konoha, the younger blonde had done a lot for her. She most likely wouldn't have been able to resume the work she had always been proud of if it weren't for Shizun's encouragement in Noriko. Without support and sheer willpower, she might never have overcome her fear of blood. Noriko had a knack for inspiring people to overcome such challenges. Good then. I ran some tests while you were asleep. You're about 3 months along. I've already let the Hokage know, and he wishes to speak to you about maternity leave from active duty. After the end of the 5th month it is advised not to use any chakra if you can avoid it, but if you must, not to use a lot. Try not to do too much sparing, and if you must, as I know ninja tend to get restless when we can't train, then be careful. Noriko gave a nod. Of course, but everything is alright. I mean I've been pretty active these last 3 months. Everything is fine. Part of that could be to do with Kyuubi. Still, be careful, better safe than sorry. Realizing that she would be out of work for the next 6 months, Noriko nodded, but it was okay. If Kakashi didn't get overworked, it would allow her more time with her daughter. They were 19, or almost 19 in her case, and it wasn't like they didn't have the money saved for this. Some ninjas are starting a family at a younger age. Because ninjas had such short lifespans, it was not unusual for ninja younger than them to have children. She was distracted from her thoughts a few seconds later when Kakashi and Naruto entered. "Oka-chan," cried Naru, practically leaping onto the bed to give the elderly woman a hug. Kakashi whispered to himself, "You're all right," as though witnessing her alive and well prevented him from losing it all. Nariko gave them both a smile. "I'm sorry for worrying you both, I do have news though." When Tsunade said, "I'll leave you three alone, I'll talk to you about scheduling another appointment later." Wondering what the other blonde woman meant, Kakashi looked from Tsunade to Nariko. After pulling a chair over, Kakashi took his girlfriend's free hand in his own and sat by her bed. Nariko bit her lip in response to his question, "So, what's the news?" "Well, I don't know how to say this, so I'll just say it, I'm pregnant." The size of Kakashi's visible eyes increased to the point where Nariko thought they might burst from his head. He had never surprised her so much. Naruto simply blinked as she glanced at her mother and father. She asked, somewhat perplexed by the situation, "What's pregnant mean?" She was only 4 years old and would turn 5 in a few weeks. She had considered delaying enrolling Naru in the academy until after January, but the girl had preferred to be with her age group, which was primarily older than her by a few months. Nariko shook her head and laughed. "It means I'm gonna have a baby, Naru-chan. You're gonna be a big sister." Naru's mouth fell open, and then she smiled. "I'm gonna have a sister or brother, like how Itachi is with Sasuke. Baka." At last, Kakashi smiled and leaned in closer to his girlfriend, lowering his mask. He said, "We're going to have a baby," and Nariko gave him a nod. He smiled and gave Nariko a quick kiss, acknowledging Naru's gross cry. October Sato no Konohagakure. The small family went back home the same day Nariko was permitted to leave. Nariko had assured Yugo that she was okay when she returned to see her. She would confess that she was a little afraid of how some of the villagers, who despised her for being a Jinchuriki, would respond to the news if she made her pregnancy public. That was more stress than she needed at the moment. Although she would complete Yugo's training with a less active role and more verbal instruction, the Hokage placed her off active duty the following day. In just 1 or 2 more weeks, Yugo would be more than prepared to assume her role as Neko Anbu. When she met Yugo for training on the 3rd day, she revealed her pregnancy to her student. That until she felt prepared to return to duty after giving birth, this would be her final mission of a sort. However, the Hokage had offered to allow her to retire, as many kunoichi in her circumstances did. However, she was okay with being taken off active duty because she didn't want to retire. With a radiant smile on her face, she gave Yugo their Anbu mask in October, just a few days after her 19th birthday, exactly 2 weeks after she learned she was pregnant. "You've been a great student, Yugo. You'll be fine in Anbu." Yugo held the mask in her hands and grinned. "Thank you, sensei." Nariko said, "Report to the Hokage, and he'll set the rest up for you," and Yugo gave a nod. After a brief farewell, the purple-haired girl departed to report to the Hokage. "I'll make sure she settles into Anbu okay," a voice she recognized said as it approached from behind. Kakashi was wearing his Anbu uniform when Nariko looked up and behind her, but his dog mask was shifted to the side of his head and was stuck there by chakra. She grinned as he put his arms around her waist. "The words, 'Thanks love,'" she said. "Come on, let's go pick Naru up. She'll be getting out of school soon." Kakashi gave nod. "Sure, we'll stop by the house so I can change before we do." After he withdrew from her, she grabbed his hand and they headed out of the training area toward the Hitaki compound. Despite having their own ghosts from the past, Nariko and Kakashi were both looking forward to the future for once. Initial timeline. Konohagakure no Sato, October 10th. Naruto Uzumaki had always been by himself. The Hokage, or the elderly man who operated the ramen stand, was the closest person she could think of as a friend, even in such a big village. She had been virtually expelled from the orphanage when she was 5 years old, and she had been living on the streets for a month and a half. It had been dangerous and lonely, even more so than the orphanage. There wasn't really anyone in the village that liked her, so she'd learned to run quickly. They glared at her as though she were the fungus on the bottom of their shoe, or they chose to ignore her. She knew they weren't really mobs, but there were times when she had to flee from hostile villagers, mobs her young mind would supply. At the time, it was just the best word to describe it. Another way to put it would be a pack. They didn't have pitchforks and torches like in the movies or books. These were merely the occasional inebriated citizen or group of inebriated citizens who happened to notice her in the wrong place at the wrong time. Thanks to the masked ninja, she had learned to avoid being caught, and even when she was, it was over quickly before it started. Even after the Hokage found her and gave her the apartment she now called home, there were times when it was at its worst. Those were the days leading up to or on October 10th, her birthday. She never left at night and had learned to stay inside on those days and at least a week beforehand unless it was absolutely necessary. Drunk people were far more prevalent back then, lamenting their losses from the night of Kyuubi's attack. She assumed something had happened to them after the masked ninja took them away, but she never really saw the same aggressive villager twice. However, such attacks were now uncommon. She had locked herself in her apartment once more and was almost 9 years old. Her cheeks were stained with tears, and her eyes were a drab shade of blue. Her apartment had a large window with cracked curtains that let in moonlight. She disliked frequently leaving them open. The sun almost seemed to be taunting her. Ridiculous, she muttered, unsure of when she had learned about it. She didn't use such lofty terms very often. She wasn't a genius, but she wasn't stupid either. In addition, the academy disliked her presence more than any other adult. She was fine with the children she attended class with, this time with peers her own age because, thanks to Hokage Gigi, she had begun the academy roughly 2 years before them. They didn't specifically try to make friends with her, nor did they necessarily ignore her. Although she wasn't sure herself, she liked to refer to Shikamaru, Shoji, and Kiba as her friends. Only once or twice had they gone to lunch together and missed class. Did they become acquaintances or friends as a result? With her arms encircling her knees and her head resting on them, Naruto closed her eyes. It felt like it would never end, another year of loneliness. In the moonlit room, a single tear escaped from her tightly closed eyes and trickled down her cheek. Updated timeline. Today, Sato no Konohagakure. October. Noriko was extremely bored by the time she had been off active duty for a full month. Indeed, she was still capable of doing some light training. Even though she was only 4 months pregnant, Kakashi was concerned when she did it. That made sense to her. Kakashi's mother, Hitaki Komi, almost died giving birth due to complications during her pregnancy. Noriko was aware that Kakashi believed the complications she had experienced during her pregnancy were the reason behind her death, which occurred less than a year after he was born. She didn't bother him, and he didn't enjoy discussing his parents. She quickly concluded that the best way to leave the compound was to walk Naruto to school every day. Although Makoto was delighted to have her visit, she was finding it difficult to adjust to slowing down because she was so accustomed to being more active. Makoto was very understanding and helpful in this regard. When she was expecting Itachi, she had experienced the same boredom. Makoto called Nori's attention back to herself and asked, "Did you and Kakashi get to see the baby this time?" It wouldn't have done much good. The Kyuubi makes ultrasounds kind of fuzzy, especially early in the pregnancy. In a month or two Tsunade should be able to get a clear image, she said with a grin. Makoto nodded and chose not to express her interest in the precise reason why the Kyuubi would have that effect. She didn't want to touch on any sensitive topics. "Well, it's not that early, you're already starting to show," Makoto remarked with a laugh. Putting a hand on her stomach, Nori grinned. Indeed, she had only a tiny, hardly perceptible bump under her clothes 3 weeks prior. Her clothes would no longer fit, so she would still have to buy new ones. She would soon need to switch to maternity clothes because she was already having problems fitting into her pants. "Nearly 5 months, stated Noriko. Naruto. Chan is very excited. Won't stop talking to the bump and asking it when she'll come out and play." This made Makoto and Noriko laugh. "So it's a girl?" Putting her teacup back on the table, Nori shook her head. Her response was, "Naru seems to think so. I don't care either way, though I think having a boy would be nice. Still, I'll be happy as long as the baby is healthy." The memory made Makoto smile. "I remember Itachi was rather excited at being a big brother himself. We should go shopping soon. Before long you'll need some new clothes." Noriko nodded in agreement and replied, "That would be great. You can help me buy some things for the baby. It's been so long since Naruto was a baby, and I had a lot of help from the Hokage since he actually had Genin bringing some of the things he bought over. I guess I'm just a little overwhelmed." Makoto gave her a reassuring smile. She was aware that her baby cousin, who was also Makoto's baby cousin in age, had not given birth to children so soon after Naruto. Despite their unexpected pregnancy, Noriko and Kakashi were pleased with the outcome and had hoped to wait a few more years. Makoto was aware that Naruto was born when Noriko was only 14 years old, but Noriko never mentioned Naruto's biological father. Noriko never brought it up because Makoto assumed she wanted to forget it. After giving it some thought, she said, "At least you have Kakashi. I'm sure he'll be with you every step of the way," and Noriko smiled in that fox-like manner that seemed to run in the family. "Yeah, Kakashi has been great. A bit overprotective, but it's understandable. Makoto picked up her teacup and stood up, saying, "Let's go start dinner. Sasuke and Naruto should be getting in from the academy soon." Following her lead, Noriko got up and went into the kitchen with the older woman with the raven hair. As October came to a close, Noriko, Kakashi, and Naruto were all at home watching a movie. Although Nori was certain that Hiruzen was giving Kakashi some leeway until he felt comfortable abandoning her and Naruto while Noriko was pregnant, Kakashi had not been going on as many missions recently. Noriko grinned as she glanced at her boyfriend and pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. As Noriko sat on the couch with her daughter dozing off by her side, she said, "Kakashi-kun, can you go get me the ice cream out of the freezer? Ooh, and make me some ramen to go with it. Don't forget the hot fudge either." At her request, Kakashi's jaw dropped a little and his eye widened. He had recently witnessed her consuming some odd foods, but nothing comparable to this. He opened his mouth to speak, feeling a little apprehensive. "We're out of ice cream, Nori-chan. I ate the last of it last night." Kakashi should have known that wasn't the right thing to say to his girlfriend just by the sudden chill that filled the room. He froze when her head raised slightly to look at him because her long bangs obscured her eyes. Noriko glared at him, her eternal Mangekyo Sharingan spinning icily in her eyes. She inquired, "What did you say?" Kakashi swallowed and wondered for a moment how Naruto could still be asleep given Noriko's apparent desire to kill. "I'll go buy some," he almost yelled, leaping from the couch and covering his mouth with his face mask. Noriko grinned as he made his way to the door with equal speed. She turned back to the movie after deactivating her M's more out of instinct than anything else. Muttering, "That's what I thought," she grinned. She could hear Kurama's distinctive laughter in her head. The fox laughed and said, "Be careful, Kit. Your Uchiha is showing." Noriko just grinned more broadly and shrugged. November. In Konoha, November was not the typical winter month. She had never been good with dates, and while it was possible for snow to fall in the normally sunny village, Konoha had not experienced a really severe snowstorm since its founding more than 60 years prior. That is, until now, they had not experienced a severe snowstorm. It was amusing because Nori couldn't recall a snowstorm that occurred in November following her 5th birthday. Such minor alterations to the timeline, brought about by both her presence and the modifications she had made, were unavoidable. While allowing Naruto to play in the snow and enjoy it, Noriko, who was 5 months pregnant, was wrapped up to stay warm. In contrast to Naru, Noriko had actually experienced this kind of heavy snowfall before and wasn't particularly fond of it, but she would concede that it was lovely. Naruto exclaimed, "Mama, look what I did," as he patted snow onto a half-size snow fox, which was similar to a snowman but shaped like a fox. Noriko grinned. She chuckled as the snow fox trembled and Yoriyuki, one of her summons, emerged from it with a slight shiver. The fox yelled, "Cold," and jumped about as though it were on hot stones. "What am I even doing here? I'm not built for cold climates." Noriko shook her head as she and Naruto gazed at the fox indifferently. Naruto said, "You're covered in fur," Yoriyuki said. "That means nothing," with a snobbish cock up his head. Noriko laughed. As she finished rolling up a knee-high snowball, which looked like the start of a snowman, Naruto moaned. "You can go in now, Yoriyuki. It's time Naru-chan and I went inside as well," she said. As Naruto said, "But Okasan, I want to finish my snowman," a pout appeared on her face. Glaring at her daughter, Noriko suppressed a smile. This only made the pouting girl pull out the puppy dog eyes, which, given how effective they were, should have been regarded as an A-rank jutsu. When the blonde girl cheered and resumed rolling snowballs for the snowman, Noriko grinned and nodded. Given that the snowman was only slightly taller than 4 feet even with her assistance, perhaps the term, "snow child," was more fitting. She held out her gloved hand for Naruto's, saying, "Okay, Naru, it's time to go inside now." Naruto took her mother's hand and said, "Can we have hot chocolate when we get inside, Mama?" "Sure. I'll make some homemade ramen for lunch as well." With Yoriyuki right behind him, Naruto smiled broadly as they entered the house. Noriko curled up against her boyfriend in bed later that night. Kakashi had removed his face mask and placed it on the nightstand beside him, and both were dressed for bed. Nori's side of the bed also had a nightstand with a book on Fuinjutsu on it, with a bookmark visibly protruding from it. She asked, "How was your mission?" And Kakashi glanced down at the blonde, gazing into her onyx eyes. Noriko nodded, realizing he couldn't go into further detail. Like other missions, long and somewhat bothersome. "My team was simply contracted to watch some targets and take them out," he said. As she nestled into his side with her head resting on his chest and Kakashi put an arm around her, she said, "I'm glad you're home." He smiled, bent over, and planted a kiss on the top of her head. "I'm glad to be home as well, Nori-chan. I have an appointment with Tsunade tomorrow," she said. "Are you free to come with me?" Kurama thinks she should be able to tell us the gender of the baby by now. Apparently they could for Kushina by the 5th month. Of course. I have to report to the Hokage late tomorrow to give my written report of my last mission. After that I have the day free. Good. The appointment is at 9, after I drop Naruto off at the academy. Reaching for the lamp on the nightstand next to him, Kakashi remarked, "Well, we should go to bed now, love." Noriko remained silent, but after the light was extinguished, the two tucked themselves into the bed and covers and fell asleep in a matter of minutes. As they made their way to the academy the following morning, Naruto questioned, "Why can't I go with you and Daddy?" Naruto nodded enthusiastically when Noriko said, "Because you want to be a strong ninja, don't you? Like Itachi.ni? Then you need to be here where they can teach you how to be a ninja." "But you and Daddy teach me at home too," revealed Naruto. "I'm getting pretty good with my fuinjutsu and calligraphy, aren't I?" In response to his daughter, Kakashi laughed at his girlfriend's mildly irritated expression and said, "Of course, Naru-chan. You're making great progress, but the training we do at home is just extra training. Clan training, and the training at the academy is what really counts towards becoming a ninja." Naruto appeared to think about this for a few seconds before nodding and smiling. "All right. I guess I understand." When the small family came to a halt outside the big building, Naruto gave her parents hugs and then patted her mother's obvious stomach bump. During one of their visits to the village shops, Makoto assisted Noriko in choosing the maternity clothes, which she had formally started wearing in the past few weeks. She could now see why so many of the village's women wore the simple yet stylish dresses with blouses. She herself had selected a dark red gown with an orange blouse that was 3/4 of the way down. It was a very comfortable outfit. When Noriko said, "She just has an argument for everything," he was laughing. "She must have picked it up from you." With a snort that was muffled by his mask, Kakashi turned and started walking in the direction of the hospital. Kakashi observed the stares they received from both shinobi and civilians as they strolled. The few hostile ones were mainly civilians, but even most of those who didn't like Noriko for possessing what they thought was only half of Kyuubi's chakra had started to ignore them. Their animosity toward the nine-tailed fox has somewhat subsided over the years. In turn, Noriko had consistently disregarded them. However, just as many people, if not more, smiled warmly at them as they went by and appeared pleased that the couple was expecting a child. Or that, in certain situations, the Yondaimi's sister was expecting a second child, since some people most likely didn't even know Noriko's name, only that she was a great shinobi and the Yondaimi's sister. The girl at the desk they went to said, "Oh, Namikaze-sama," as though she was taken aback to see them. "How can I help you today?" "We have an appointment with Senju Tsunade," Noriko noted with a gentle smile. "Of course, just give me a minute to let Senju-sama know you're here." Kakashi and Noriko retreated a short distance, and Noriko chuckled to herself, which was strange in and of itself. Kakashi asked, "What's so funny?" And Noriko turned back to face the nearly frantic girl behind the desk. Noriko whispered, "She must be new," loud enough for him to hear her. "Poor girl seems to be overwhelmed. Matt, I'm sure she'll get the hang of it. You must be the first important person in the village she's dealt with though. You make it sound like I'm royalty or something, Kashi-kun," Noriko remarked with a laugh. He almost teased his girlfriend when he said, "Well, being the Yondaimi's only living sister, and a survivor of the Uzumaki and descendant of the Uchiha, you sort of are to some people." Kakashi laughed as Noriko punched him in the shoulder. She had quite the punch, and it had hurt, but it was laughable in comparison to what it would have felt like if she had been trying hard rather than just being playful. When the nurse said, "Namikaze-sama, Senju-sama will see you in Hitaki-sama in room 102, Noriko and Kakashi nodded. Finding room 102 didn't take long, and Tsunade and Shizune waited inside. Shizune said, "Oh wow, Noriko, you've gotten so big," with slightly widened eyes. Having seen enough pregnant women to know what to anticipate, Tsunade simply laughed. She said, "You've definitely gained weight well," and gestured for Noriko to take a seat. "How have you been?" "Fine. Just some random heartburn, gas, and backaches," Noriko replied. "Don't forget the random mood swings and weird cravings." Kakashi gave him a sheepish laugh as Noriko gave him a fierce look. Shizune and Tsunade both chuckled. Tsunade remarked. That's to be expected. Before she had Shizune move the ultrasound machine forward, the examination started as usual, checking to make sure Noriko was okay. Well, you're as healthy as a horse, that's good, Tsunade remarked. Now lay back and we'll get the ultrasound out of the way. With a rather excited smile, Noriko followed instructions. Her orange blouse was pulled up over her dress, which had been pushed down beneath the bump and slid off her shoulders. The gel applied to her abdomen and the wand, like tool Tsunade used, startled her. An image appeared on the TV, like screen. Both Kakashi and Noriko gazed at the picture with some wonder, although Noriko found it difficult to tell what was what in terms of the baby. She stared for about a minute before she started to realize what she was seeing. Well, the baby's heartbeat looks good. You're nearing 24 weeks along, and the image has definitely cleared up. Do you want to know the gender? Replied Shizune. After giving Kakashi a quick glance and grinning, Noriko nodded back to Tsunade and Shizune. Tsunade grinned after examining the picture for a few more seconds. Congratulations, it's a girl. December. Noriko was 6 months along by December, and she would only need to wait a few more months to give birth to her daughter. When they informed Naruto that the baby would be a girl and that she would have a younger sister, she was ecstatic. She had been telling them for some time that the baby would be a girl, so she was a little smug. In fact, compared to the previous month, December was pretty dull. As anticipated, Noriko started to grow larger and continued to accompany Naruto on his daily walk to the academy. On other days, her back would hurt so much that she would let Naruto go there by himself and then spend the day lounging. She would occasionally take a soothing bubble bath or nap on her cozy bed. Tsunade gave her some medications that would help with that and were safe to take while pregnant, so fortunately it wasn't too bad. Kakashi was away on missions more often than not. Even though it was a little inconvenient, both made do with the fact that it was a part of the shinobi way of life, and the Anbu was overworked due to the recent influx of missions. Overlooking a team of genin that she had hired to tend to her garden, Noriko was currently outside on the patio. Her garden was resilient even during the winter, which in Konoha was not all that different from spring, fall, and summer. To Naruto's chagrin and Noriko's relief, the November snow had already melted. Noriko got up and said, "Do you three want a snack and some lemonade?" A boy from the much lesser known Hano clan, an Aburame boy, and a Uchiha girl made up the genin. A few feet away from the garden, their Jonin sensei was sitting beneath the big tree, keeping an eye on his genin. The genin stood and glanced from Noriko to their sensei, who nodded after a brief pause. All three pupils appeared to nod and sigh. "Yes please," said the girl, who Noriko assumed was named Uchiha Misa. She said, "And you Jin, sensei?" And the man with the dark hair shook his head. He said with a small smile, "No thank you, Lady Uzumaki." Namikaze, and the blonde nodded before going through the back door of her home. About 15 minutes later, she came back with a tray of sandwiches and then returned for the glasses and lemonade. After finishing their snack, the three genin went back to their mission, and Noriko started reading one of her old Fuinjutsu books that were only known to the Uzumaki clan. The genin team was just a few minutes away, and Naruto was beaming broadly when she got home from the academy. Since today was the last day before the academy students' 2-week break, Noriko wasn't shocked. Similar trends prevailed throughout the remainder of December, which was by far one of the slowest months to date. Noriko devoted a lot of time to teaching Naruto Fuinjutsu because she thought it would benefit her to begin earlier than she could in her timeline. It was not surprising to her that Naruto embraced the art. When she wasn't at home, she was usually with Makoto at the Uchiha compound, discussing various topics, including the baby, such as Sasuke's performance in the academy and Itachi's development as a shinobi. Noriko was aware that she was eagerly awaiting the birth and that it couldn't arrive soon enough. Sato no Konohagakure, January. Hiroshi asked the blonde, "Thank you for doing this, Noriko," and escorted her to his classroom. "I put in for my retirement last month and they still can't find a replacement. It was actually through the Hokage I even got you." With a gentle smile, Noriko laughed to herself. Her daughter had spoken to the Hokage about it, but Hiroshi, her current academy teacher, was unaware of this. Iruka had come a year later, and she had dimly recalled him retiring when she was in her 3rd year at the academy. The instructor who eventually replaced Hiroshi was a terrible woman who detested her. In retrospect, she felt sorry for the woman because the Kyuubi attack had claimed her entire family. Her husband, 2 young grandchildren, sons, daughter, and son.in.law. Although it was extremely sad, she wasn't the only one who had lost family members in that way. Since her attempts to impede Noriko's ninja development had been wholly unacceptable, Noriko had devised a way to deal with the situation. She was qualified to teach at the academy even though she was in her 7th month of pregnancy and was unable to do much more than demonstrate hand signals and give instructions. The teacher aide could help her with the ninjutsu she was unable to perform due to pregnancy-related restrictions on using heavy chakra. Even though she was a jonin, she could work at this job and relieve her boredom at the same time. The teachers were usually chunin, but there was no requirement that they be. She only recalled Hiroshi's retirement and the awful woman she could no longer recall by name because she was bored. As she grew older and found herself in this new timeline, her recollections of her younger years became hazy and dim. She had a suspicion it was the result of tampering with time. She ought to have realized that there would be repercussions. Noriko had approached Hiruzen regarding the position. In order to have a little fun at her daughter's expense, as well as to relieve some of the boredom she was experiencing from being off active duty since, to be honest, she didn't understand how any Uzumaki-blooded woman could stand being so inactive for 9 months. She hadn't been this still since, well, never. She believed it was her responsibility as Naruto's mother to make the blonde girl look as bad as she could. She could show off the baby photos after she started to like boys, found someone who piqued her interest, and brought him home. In retaliation for all those late nights and dirty diapers, Kakashi labeled her evil. A dirty diaper from even a partially Uzumaki baby was the worst thing ever. She felt that a little fun was in order. After the baby was born, she would be off duty for at least another year. When she was on a mission, she trusted someone to look after the baby for at least 6 months. After all, that was how it had worked with Naruto. She was certain that she could manage it because she had been Anbu when Naruto was a baby. Oh, don't worry about it. I needed something to get me out of the compound more. This whole off-duty thing is harder than it looks when one is so used to moving about and being on missions, she said, then stopped herself from thinking. As they walked into the classroom, which was crowded with the 27 eager shinobi, Hiroshi laughed and nodded. Many of them are clan heirs. When she saw the door open, Naruto's blonde head twitched, and Noriko's eyes widened at her sight, but she refrained from grinning in amusement. Naru was unsure of her thoughts. Her mother was standing with her teacher in her class, grinning subtly. She outgrew everything, so she wore the red maternity dress she had been wearing for the past 3 months or so. Black shinobi sandals and an orange blouse with elbow-length sleeves and a high collar were worn underneath the dress. She had a large baby bump on her abdomen, which was unusual for the academy's teachers and assistants. Naruto was not aware that the dark red fabric of Noriko's forehead protector, which was tied around her forehead, had once belonged to Sakura in a different timeline. Although it nearly seemed out of place, Noriko managed to pull it off. As Hiroshi started, Naruto started to feel bad. Class, as you know I am retiring. Minami Sensei has been teaching most of the classes until the Hokage could find someone to replace me permanently, I said. This is your new teacher. Hands were raised in the air almost immediately. Most people were unaware of the woman's precise name, but many already knew who she was. Yes, Hiroshi said, gesturing momentarily to Hinata, who lowered her arm shyly before continuing. Noriko noticed that her stutter wasn't as bad as her timeline's Hinata's when she asked, Actually how will she teach a certain subjects while pregnant, sensei? Although the younger blonde would never publicly acknowledge it, Hinata was essentially Naruto's best friend outside of Sasuke. In contrast, Noriko had never had the guts to approach the Hyuga heiress in the original timeline. One could say the same of Hinata. Because Hinata had a better upbringing and wasn't as deeply ingrained in her fear of rejection as Noriko was at that age, Naruto was able to overcome her apprehension and become friends with her in this timeline. Hiroshi nodded when Noriko said, if it's okay with you, I'll respond to that. I'll be teaching you mostly theory and history until I have the baby. For a few months after which Minami Sensei will return to teaching you everything until I can return to the job. Once my daughter is old enough to be left with a sitter. When I return I will be able to teach you more practical subjects, such as taijutsu, and actually demonstrate ninjutsu, genjutsu and other related subjects rather than just showing you the hand signs and talking to you about them. I will also give a basic lesson on fuinjutsu, though if you decide you wish to go further into the subject you'll have to do it on your own time. Konoha doesn't have much on fuinjutsu, but it had enough to create a few famous masters so I'm sure you'll get by. Noriko reasoned that it was unnecessary to mention that Senju Mito, who was officially a member of the Uzumaki clan, brought over the few fuinjutsu that were still in the shinobi library. Even though it occurred before her birth in her timeline, she didn't want to discuss the destruction of her clan because it was a sensitive topic for her. She had accepted her past cover story so well into her life that she felt as though she had actually lived it, and she was a survivor in this new timeline. Since she had moved on from Uzumaki Naruto, she no longer even reacted negatively to the name. It didn't help that she had actually survived it because of a seal she had discovered on the island while training with Jiraiya. Because she was Minato's younger sister, she was also known as Uzumaki Noriko, Namikaze Noriko, and infrequently Uchiha Noriko. The first thing an enemy ninja thought when she activated her Sharingan in front of them was, "Oh shit, a Uchiha." It was easy to mistake her for one. Accordingly, she was Uchiha Noriko in Kumo's bingo book. Her resemblance to Minato, primarily due to her sharper chin and long golden yellow hair with faint red highlights, made it even easier for an enemy to mistake her for a Namikaze. The connection became even clearer if she was using the Hiraishin, which was one of the few things that kept her alive in her timeline. She and the others would joke before the Jiken Ripparu was used. As a result, Iwa was listed as Namikaze Noriko in her bingo book. Due to the seals she occasionally used in combat and the fact that she typically identified herself as such, Kiri saw her as Uzumaki Noriko. At first, it caused her to have a bit of an identity crisis and was rather annoying, but she eventually learned to ignore it. She took pride in being Uzumaki, Namikaze, or Uchiha. Actually, it was kind of funny how what began as a cover story turned into her entire life. She recognized the boy as Inuzuka Kiba, who looked exactly like him in the original timeline but much younger. "So basically you going to teach us the boring stuff while Minami Sensei handles the cool physical stuff," he said. She shrugged as she looked at him through eyes that had suddenly become heavy-lidded. "If that's how you want to look at it, I can't use chakra at this point in my pregnancy. Many will say I am an unfit choice to take over for Hiroshi, but I can still teach you many things without the use of heavy chakra and taijutsu. I can tell you many things those history books of yours don't tell you anymore. But we'll get to that at a later date." Noriko was given permission to speak when a girl who Noriko recognized as a young Yamanaka Ino raised her hand and nodded. "Are you really the sister of the Yondaime Hokage and cousin to the wife of the Uchiha clan head?" she inquired. The attention this received from students who were bored and almost asleep made Noriko laugh. Distantly yes. My grandfather was Uchiha Koda, he died in the last war. Before that though he met my grandmother who was a member of the Uzumaki clan and had my mother, Shiori. My mother later met my father and one thing led to another and 9 months later I was born. I never met my brother until I was much older, and my homelands had been destroyed by the alliance of Kiri, Kumo and Iwa before the Third Shinobi War began. I was young then, but already a chunin. I survived the ordeal and left to find the brother my mother had said I had here in Konoha. I was 13 when I arrived, and 14 when the village was told of my existence. What isn't commonly remembered though is that I am also the second cousin of the Red-Chained Death, Uzumaki Kushina. In fact we look a lot alike. Easily mistaken for sisters. Though she believed the class needed a history lesson, Noriko had spoken more about the topic than she had intended to demonstrate to them that she would still be able to teach them engaging material even though her condition prevented her from being the most physically active of teachers. Though it wasn't always dull, she detested history as much as the next person. In fact, she recalled dozing off during many of those classes when she was their age. According to her, it was up to the teacher. I'm sorry if this offends you Namikaze Sama, but if you were 14 when the village found out about you, how old are you now? I mean, Naruto is our age, how could you be her mother? Sakura, the girl with pink hair, walked away. Naruto suppressed a glare at the girl by biting the inside of her cheek. She had once questioned how her mother could be younger than the majority of mothers in the village, but her mother simply replied that sometimes that was just the way things were. She didn't resemble her father at all, though, and she had always questioned how she could inherit so much from her mother while not having dark eyes like Noriko or Kakashi. They always shifted the conversation to ramen if she asked. Noriko appeared to be uncomfortable before she replied, I suppose I am young. I am 19, I'll turn 20 in October. I had Naruto when I was only 14, in fact it was only a week and a half after I turned 14. This was the reason my brother never told the village about me despite having lived with him a year beforehand. I was young, but these sort of things happen, and I've never regretted it once. Despite her smile, Naruto's gaze remained fixed on her desk. It was somewhat embarrassing that people were watching her, as though she were a unique specimen that was rarely seen. Another unidentified boy questioned, Namikaze. Sama, I've heard you can do the jutsu that gave the Yondaime his moniker. Is that true? Can you really summon Kitsune with multiple tails? I've heard that you're dating the copy.nin Kakashi. How did you two get together? Overwhelmed by the volume of inquiries reaching her, Noriko blinked. This was not the kind of response she had anticipated. In reality, some of these inquiries had nothing to do with being a ninja and were highly personal. However, they had inquired, and the way she and Kakashi met wasn't exactly a big secret. Hell, if anyone really paid attention, their relationship was essentially a public record. After working together for years in Anbu, they had become close through Naruto. Kakashi had initiated contact, and following the initial date, things simply progressed. Actually, there wasn't much to see. As one might anticipate from a corny romance book, it was actually rather fluffy. It was completely different from what one would imagine when they thought of the dreaded Sharingan no Kakashi. They resembled any other pair. After they reconciled, they typically had make-up sex. In fact, she was fairly certain she had conceived their daughter during one of those post-fight festivities. But Noriko was not going to get into that much. To put this all into simple terms, yes, I do know the Hiraishin, I also know the Rasengan. They were taught to me by my brother before his death. I am also the only summoner of the Kitsune clan in many years, and some do have multiple tails. I've been in a loving relationship with Hitaki Kakashi for many years, and as very apparent we're expecting our youngest daughter in March. Even though the students appeared to have more questions, Hiroshi swiftly stopped them and turned the class over to Noriko. After leaving, Noriko took a seat and started the day's lessons, with Minami-sensei handling the hands-on instruction. Naru-chan told me what you did this morning, surprising her by taking over for her old sensei, Kakashi remarked while chopping vegetables, helping to prepare dinner. The dislike of raw vegetables remained constant between mother and daughter, but they both enjoyed them when they were cooked well and had enough flavor to mask the fact that they were eating vegetables, which typically tasted disgusting. As she stirred the broth of the stew, Noriko laughed. She had a cheesecake ready for after supper in the refrigerator and rice finishing in another cooker. In the Hitaki household, dessert was practically a necessity, and even though Kakashi didn't have as much of a sweet tooth as Noriko and Naruto, he still liked everything that Noriko prepared. She started making more and more sweet things since becoming pregnant because she had a bigger sweet tooth. She was still able to manage her cravings, though, and she naturally made sure Naruto didn't consume too much junk food. At 12, Naru was a miserable 4 feet 8.5, and she wanted to give her the opportunity to grow taller. She looked at the silver-haired man and scrunched her nose up cutely at the thought, saying, I need something to do other than stay home and brush up on my fuinjutsu, darling. You know I don't do bored well. She shook her head when he said, haha, I know. Is that the only reason though? You know me so well. No, I also wanted to save our darling daughter from a year of dealing with a total bitch for a teacher. I don't even remember her that well. Just that she made it extra hard for me to pass, and it was because of her I failed to graduate. As he piled the potatoes, carrots, corn off the cob, and onion into a big bowl, Kakashi cast a serious glance at his wife. With half of his focus on Noriko, he drew the celery in front of him and started chopping it. He was relieved that Noriko had accepted the position. Since Naruto's early years, they hadn't really had any issues with the village. However, some people were still not afraid to express their dislike or hatred for Naruto and Noriko. He detested witnessing Naruto's sadness when she was refused entry to a public area for a reason she didn't fully comprehend at the time. He whispered, sometimes I forget just who you once were, and Noriko laughed quietly. I'm glad you took the job, it'll be good for you to get out more. Other than going to sit with Makoto, I mean. I've been thinking of leaving Anbu soon. Noriko spun as fast as her big belly would allow, dropping the stirring spoon she was holding. What? But you enjoy working with Anbu? Despite some of the questionable missions and long hours, she asked, her eyes wide, looking at the man. We both enjoyed it, which is why we stayed on as long as we did. Kakashi gave nod. Both of us have attended Anbu since we were 14 years old. Even though it didn't seem like it, it caused us to miss a significant portion of Naruto's childhood. Hell, the job nearly prevented us from seeing each other's emotions. If Naruto hadn't pushed us together, I'm not sure if I would have had the confidence to ask you out. Noriko grinned, remembering it well. The day that I set out to find Tsunade. Bachan. Mama, Naruto-chan called me. And she called me Dada, Kakashi said with a broad smile on her face. It was a good-looking smile, and she couldn't help but notice the faint dimples that were not as noticeable as some others, but they added a special touch to his good-looking features, which had a softness that came from his mother. The dimples were only noticeable when he smiled widely, and Kakashi was one of those people who liked to smile and smirk a little. Noriko loved that he was a guarded individual, something she had known since her timeline, but once he let someone into his heart, they stayed there. He was also fiercely protective, like a dog or wolf, which was appropriate given the Hitaki clan summons. I've been at Anbu longer than most, which is my point. After joining, a person can serve for a minimum of 5 years. He put the chopped celery in the bowl and sighed. I've been here for about 6 years now, and you served for 5 years before you retired your mask to Yugo. I wish we could spend more time together, with you, Naruto, and the baby. Missions that require me to be away for weeks or even months at a time are not something I want to have to do. I don't want to miss anything because my father was away a lot when I was growing up. After blinking away some tears that threatened to well up in her eyes, Noriko moved closer to her boyfriend, putting her arms around his neck and raising her face the extra inch it took to plant a kiss. After a few seconds of a gentle yet intense kiss, they withdrew, with Noriko keeping her arms around him and him around her waist. Kakashi, I adore you, and I agree with you if you truly believe it's time for you to leave Anbu. However, you are aware that Hiruzen Gigi will be pressuring you to join Genin teams in a year or two, right? Noriko laughed and the two remained wrapped up for a few more seconds before she reluctantly pulled away and retrieved the mixing bowl of vegetables. Kakashi blinked before the realization hit and he buried his face in her hair, breathing in her scent. She winked and said, "Everything will work out," before returning to the big pot of stew. "Will you finish the rice for me while I finish the stew?" she asked. After saying, "Of course Nori-chan," he stepped around her to reach the rice cooker. With a joyful smile, Noriko stirred the vegetables into the stew while humming a whirlpool lullaby. February. Sitting opposite her daughter, Noriko gracefully swept the brush across the paper. Naruto sat in a similar position, but as she focused and made a cautious brush stroke, her hand trembled a little. Her tongue protruded from the side of her mouth. As she looked up a little to see how she was doing, Noriko saw this through her eyelashes and grinned, recalling how hard Fuinjutsu had been for her during the first few months Jiraiya had her learning it, but Naruto had adapted to it much more easily. Naru had people complimenting her intelligence, whereas hers had been stunted by years of discouragement in her decision to give up on ever knowing a lot. Perhaps this was because she had never suffered from people belittling her more openly than they did now. The little blonde was a master of Fuinjutsu, but like her, Naruto was not a genius and her book smarts were still a little lacking, though better than Noriko's had been at that age. She had been the same after she had truly opened her mind to the arts and stopped hiding behind a facade of total ignorance. She had started to make significant progress in the art of sealing after obtaining scrolls and other artifacts from Uzushio's remains. It appeared as though Jiraiya had returned with only a few more tricks than when she had left, possibly because she had ensured that she had learned more than just the practical. She spent more than half of the time practicing her taijutsu, studying Fuinjutsu, and relearning her foundational education, which had been hampered by her careless academy life and early years. She completed the final stroke of her seal, one of the most valuable seals owned by the Uzumaki family and a component of the enormous warding system that had guarded their island in Shinobi Village, with a reminiscent sigh that was almost silent. Regretfully, it had let them down when Iwa, Kumo, and Kiri attacked Uzushio. Her grandfather, the former head of the Uzumaki clan, had left one of the last active seals on Uzushio after it was destroyed, and she shook her head, banishing the memories she now had. A Uzumaki would be transported into a pocket dimension where they would experience the final days of Uzushio as if they were present when they let blood activated and were within 5 feet of it, or touched it like she had. She had seen it all, and at the very end, she had even experienced the agony of being killed with her clan before appearing to awaken outside the intricate memory seal. Arrow. Sennin had almost gone into a frenzy, believing that something had gone wrong. Both were painful to her, and those memories were the most vivid of the original timeline, but the war had been worse for her because they were so much more vivid than her memories of Uzushio's death. She had placed the warding seal around the Hitaki compound when Naruto was a baby to keep assassins and drunkenly brave civilians out, and the seal she was teaching him now was only the first layer of the warding seal that the Uzumaki had made and maintained within the clan. In addition to alerting her when someone was visiting or wishing to enter the compound, they would also activate the master seal, which was inked onto Noriko's left wrist but was invisible unless she used chakra or the wards to make it visible. People close to the family were keyed into the wards by their blood and chakra signature. Noriko thought that Fuinjutsu was a sentient art on some level, and that the seals, particularly the warding seal that the Uzumaki clan had kept so guarded, had a mind of their own. Since it was a 5-step procedure and a complicated network of layered seals cooperating, this was typically taught to Uzumakis when they were young, like Naruto is now. Naruto had mastered the fundamental seals, including the one used to seal bodies and objects into scrolls, the exploding seals for tags, and the preservation seals for food scrolls, which were at the more complex end of the basic spectrum of Fuinjutsu. Therefore, Noriko had determined that Naruto was old enough to learn the Uzumaki hidden ward seal, which was likely one of the oldest seals created by Uzumaki and didn't actually have a unique name like some Fuinjutsu techniques, like the Shiki Fujin or some barrier seals. In order to honor my clan, Noriko thought to herself, maybe in a year or two, once I can travel with the baby and Naruto, I'll take her to visit Uzu no Kuni. Maybe it's time I did so. Although little was known about the Namikaze clan, she had always felt more a part of the Uzumaki than the Namikaze side of her family, which had begun as a simple merchant family before evolving into a shinobi and merchant clan. They had arrived in Konoha early on, perhaps 5 years after the village was established, but it was unclear where they had come from. Half were merchants by profession, while the other half were shinobi who were experts in wind ninjutsu and assassination. Her father was among the few remaining at the end of the Second War. Even the clan's civilians, who had never been as numerous as the other clans in Konoha, had been killed in the Third War, with the exception of her father. Although she was now close to the Uchiha because they were also her family, she always felt a stronger connection to the Uzumaki side of her family. She could still say that nothing had really changed. Perhaps the reason she had always felt so cut off from the Namikaze side of things in both of her lives was that she had no one with whom to connect. "How is Oka-chan doing?" Naru scooted her paper closer to Noriko and asked. It was a little shaky compared to Noriko's own copy, but with practice and time, the little pig-tailed blonde would not have any trouble with it. She picked it up and examined it closely, examining each curve and brushstroke. She smiled as she placed the seal in front of the optimistic young lady. "Naru-chan, it's excellent, but some of these brushstrokes still seem a little off. This wouldn't be a big issue with some seals, though, because some seals are flexible. I believe that's the best word for it. This seal is very touchy, but it's not very obvious to the untrained eye. If it is not executed flawlessly, the intended outcome will not be achieved. In the worst situation, it would fail entirely," she said gently. Naruto's expression dimmed, but she quickly smiled and took out another blank sheet of paper. "Watch me, Dadbao, I'll succeed this time." As she watched Naruto dig into the seal again, Noriko laughed. With her blue eyes narrowed into slits, Naruto gritted her teeth and rose from the ground, adopting a stance that her mother had taught her that was an odd combination of the Uzumaki style and the Uchiha Interceptor's fist. Her father remained standing, seemingly unconcerned by her combative posture. She detested how he swatted her away each time she attacked, treating her like a fly, even though she knew she had no chance against him. Kakashi remarked casually, "Looks like you need some more practice," and Naruto snarled in her throat before lunging forward. She fell to the ground, trying to sweep Kakashi's legs out from under him with her left hand, but he just jumped over it. As soon as his feet touched the ground again, she was standing up. He quickly sidestepped Naruto's punch to his chest by grabbing the forearm firmly in his grasp. "Meh, you're letting your anger get the better of you again, Naruto-chan," he replied. He stopped talking when his daughter twisted her body in his grasp, utilizing her agility and flexibility to swing her leg into his side despite what was sure to be the worst kind of Indian burn. In a matter of seconds, he and Noriko were across the yard, with Noriko sitting on the patio and observing their training. She was only permitted to walk the distance to the academy every morning, but she had to sit while teaching because she was 8 months pregnant and her due date was approaching in March. Noriko realized that this was actually her first pregnancy, even though everyone except Kakashi, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Hiruzen believed it to be her second. Tsunade had even threatened to send Shizune to watch over her if she attempted to go through more than minimal labor. As the deadline drew near, being a Jinchuriki made things a little more challenging. Months prior, Jiraiya had taken Kakashi aside to teach the boy how to keep the seal intact. When she went into labor, Kurama instinctively pushed against the seal, which caused the seal to loosen and his chakra to leak out, even though her seal was stronger than her mother's. It was just a fact, and no one knew why exactly. Although it would be simpler to maintain her seal, Hiruzen still desired that she be taken to a safe place, just as her mother had, in order to prevent as much of the past from happening again. Since it was the safest place known, she had already sealed the ward around the cave they would be using, which was near the location where Naruto and herself had been born in the original timeline. Madara was the only other person who might be aware of it, and she didn't seek him out for another attack. He shouldn't even be aware of her previous identity before she arrived in this timeline. Huh. No fair, Naruto said, panting and putting her hands on her knees. You used a substitution. When Noriko said, you could have as well, Naru. With her low pigtails, which always made Noriko think of Tsunade, whom Naruto was always smitten with and whom he sometimes called Ba-chan. Swinging behind her, Naruto pouted, puffing out her cheeks as she turned her head away sulking. Her hair had grown to barely shoulder blade length, with her bangs still neatly framing her face and her pure blonde locks, which were on the spiky side even when tied back into the pigtails. She wore a black T-shirt with a red spiral on the front and one of her father's scarecrow faces, which were common on his Ninken, on the shoulder. The small bunny hair clips remained in place even after years had passed. She was wearing the same outfit she usually wore when she wasn't at the academy or training, orange shinobi pants that were tailored to fit her small frame but ended mid-calf and were a little baggy. She was also wearing black shinobi sandals. With a smile, Kakashi said, you did well, Naruto-chan, and proceeded to pick up the young girl. She was still small enough to do so, and even at her age, she seemed to like being carried still, so she put an arm around her father's neck, sat on his shoulders, and gripped his gravity-defying hair. Even as a smaller toddler, she had enjoyed sitting on his shoulders and holding onto his hair, occasionally pulling on it. Kakashi sighed, realizing he should have predicted she would do this. Next time I'll get you, Naruto said. You know, if you let me sign with the Ninken I could have won that round. Noriko rolled her eyes at her daughter's hints as Kakashi laughed. You know you're in line for the Kitsune summons Naruto, Kakashi stated, though if you want to sign both that's fine too. But if you do you won't be able to sign the contract with the Toads. Or the Slug contract if you decide to take Tsunade's offer, Noriko continued. Why am I unable to simply call forth all four? With a faint whine in her clear voice, she yelled. Well, to start, it hasn't been done in a very long time. It's a bit possessive of the summon clans. The two animal clans must cooperate and get along, and two is the most ninjas have been known to do in a long time, Noriko started. After removing Naruto from his shoulders, Kakashi went to the small table she was seated at on the patio, seated her in the third chair, and then took a seat next to her. Additionally, having two hands makes it easier to manage two summoning contracts at once because you can bind them to yourself with separate hands. Use the right clan to summon one and the left clan to summon the other. Additionally, if a third or fourth party is involved, the Toads will not cooperate with the Kitsune clan. They are by far Konoha's most possessive contract partner. Apart from your mother's foxes, that is, Kakashi continued, essentially echoing Nori's statement. Noriko gave a nod. Additionally, you are aware of what we have told you. None of them will allow you to sign until after graduation. However, I guess you can sign with your father's dogs before then if you'd like. It would be best to start younger because it is Ninken and primarily used for tracking. Kakashi gave nod. Indeed, signing with the Ninken is customary once we reach the age range of 5 to 8. However, this was during a time when the Hitaki clan was more numerous, depending on the parent. You have to make up your mind, though. I signed when I graduated the academy, but I was 5 so. He trailed off, shrugging. You already know that you are able to have two contracts. You must decide between the Toads, Ninken, and Slugs because you have been the Kitsune's promised summoner since you were a very young child. Naruto, who had always eagerly anticipated signing the Kitsune contract but had also been informed that she would not be permitted to do so until after she became a genin, looked between her parents with slightly wide eyes before they narrowed slightly in thought. Jiraiya of the Sannin, who resembled her grandfather, had informed her that the Toads had consented to collaborate with the Kitsune clan if she wanted to sign with them as well when she grew up. Because she disliked being messed up by her former teammate and like Naruto, who had known the girl since she was very young, Tsunade offered her the Slug contract when she grew up. Not quite as territorial as the Toads and some other summons, the Kitsune clan was known for having rather good fighters and medics, and the Slugs were happy to work with them. After what seemed like an eternity of ups and downs, she finally made up her mind. I am aware of my goals. When I'm older, I'll sign with the Toads, she said with a foxy smile. I only hope that Granny isn't in too much distress. With a smile, Kakashi gave Naruto a gentle head pat. Good choice, Naru-chan. I think the Toads will suit you, working alongside the Kitsune clan. Although she wouldn't have objected if her daughter hadn't picked the Toads, Noriko would have been a little let down. Perhaps she was just biased because of her previous association with the Toads. Since the Toads typically only accepted 2 summoners at a time, she had not resigned with them because she wanted to save the opportunity for Naruto when she was older. She was content with just her kitsune, but one year for her birthday, Kakashi gave her a surprise. In addition to complementing a genjutsu user and being extremely fast, the wolf summons were typically a tracking clan, though they could attack as easily as they could convey a message. Some of them were even proficient in ninjutsu, which is typically the older summons. They had belonged to Kakashi's father, the Hitaki clan's final wolf summoner. She had questioned why he hadn't signed it, but he had explained that he had never felt comfortable about it because it reminded him of too many things that happened before he had met her. After his father passed away, it was just gathering dust in a sealed storage vault in the main house. He wanted her to have an alternative since she had lost her contract with the Toads. She had discovered that the Kitsune and Wolf clans were very similar, demanded equal attention, and were too similar for her to play favorites with. They were also much more possessive, but they decided to cooperate with the Kitsune clan because of their similarities. Naruto was not given the option to sign with the Wolves because they were different from most contracts in that they only permitted 1 summoner at a time. He had given it to her on her 18th birthday, and it had only been a year, turning 2 in October when she turned 20. When she had called forth Yoriyuki in December, she had also called forth Nezuko, a young wolf with gray and black coats. Although Nezuko was lazy unless Noriko had a mission-related task for her to complete, she did enjoy the snow more than her fox summon did. Thus, despite the snow beneath her, Nezuko had remained nearby and slept the whole time while Naruto had enticed Yoriyuki to play with her in the deep snow. Naruto was a very spoiled child, but she also had a way of persuading others. For example, she had persuaded Noriko to call forth one of her wolf and fox summons so they could play with them in the snow. After deciding that Naruto should be allowed to play like a real kid, she gave in and called in Yoriyuki and Nezuko. After the baby was born, she would be more focused on the child and wouldn't have as much time for Naruto as she did now. She didn't want Naruto to get envious, which she had read happened when a new baby entered a home with another child, but it was something Naruto was accustomed to because he was from a ninja family and that had been due to missions. Itachi hadn't had the issue when Sasuke was born, at least, and Makoto had told her that it probably wouldn't happen too badly, if at all, as it usually happened with civilian families rather than shinobi families. Given how thrilled she had remained about being a big sister, it appeared that Naruto wouldn't either. "I'm sure Tsunade will understand," Noriko said with a smile, adding, "I actually anticipate them visiting soon. It should not be long before Jiraiya returns to the village after his journey. I suppose he's a little more anxious because he wants to be present for the birth." Blinking, Naruto gazed up at her mother naively. "What are you worried about, Mom? You're okay, aren't you?" she inquired, frowning. "Your mother is fine, Naru-chan," said Kakashi. "Jiraiya Sama just worries a lot is all." After a few moments of uncertainty, Naruto nodded and leapt to her feet. "Permit me to visit the park." Noriko nodded when she said, "I think the others might be there today. Be home before dark, and be careful." After nodding and smiling, Naruto bounded out of the yard, hopped the fence to the compound road, and made his way to the compound gates. Noriko stood and declared, "Uzumaki longevity be damned, she's going to give me gray hairs before I'm 30. Kakashi suppressed a chuckle, saying that even if he had a dozen kunai launchers, he would never discuss age with a woman because it was harmful to one's health, particularly if the woman's hormones were all out of balance. She said casually, "You can laugh, you know, I'm not gonna kill you if you laugh," and as she walked into the house, she heard Kakashi laugh softly as he followed her. Kakashi opened the front door and saw a familiar middle-aged white-haired man, Jiraiya. "Sama, Noriko's been expecting you for a while." Tsunade was standing next to him, but he couldn't see Shizune anywhere. Jiraiya apologized, saying, "I can't express how much deja vu I'm already experiencing as the date draws closer. I realized how close it was and hurried back. This time, I made a self-promise to be in the village in case something went wrong." "Arrow. Sennin, stop being so suspicious," an amused voice exclaimed. "There won't be any problems," as she ushered the dining room into the living room. She stood leaning against the archway leading into the dining room, where there were 2 archways that led into the kitchen or into the hall, and Jiraiya's eyes were almost out of his head as he looked at her. Her long, sunset blonde hair fell loosely to a few inches above her ankles, and she wore a dark red dress with an orange blouse that had 3/4-length sleeves. Shinobi sandals were worn on her feet. It was the brightest shade of sunset blonde, not red and pin. Straight, but it still fell like Kushina's, albeit a little messier and a little more spiky as it cascaded down her back in a mostly straight waterfall. She resembled Kushina so much that it was unbelievable, aside from her black eyes, larger bust, and Minato's sharper chin and more defined cheekbones. This fact was unaffected by the fact that she was as large as a house, if not larger, a gross exaggeration, but she was extremely pregnant. Even though almost 6 years had gone by, it did hurt a little if Kakashi and Noriko reminded him in any way of Minato and Kushina. Tsunade, who had not been as close to Minato and Kushina as he had been, nevertheless cared deeply for both, and she appeared to have noticed the same thing as him, though it didn't affect her as much. "Whoa, you're really fat." Without giving it any thought, Jiraiya said, and Kakashi laughed uneasily as he closed the door after the two Sannin. Noriko took a deep breath to control her anger as she glared at him, her eye twitching with the desire to beat the pervert over the head. She began by saying, "First, I'm not fat, I'm pregnant," to which Jiraiya gave a tense laugh. "Second, why don't you two enter the dining room? If you would like, I can get us some cake." Tsunade said, "Just something to drink would be fine," and Jiraiya agreed. After they were all seated, Tsunade inquired, "Nori-chan, have you been getting enough sleep?" Naturally, since Kakashi resigned from Anbu and requested leave until the baby is born, I don't think he has forgotten about me. Well, aside from attending the academy. "Are you leaving Anbu, then?" Astonished, Jiraiya inquired. "That's good, you need the support right now more than ever," Tsunade replied. "Once the baby comes you'll also need the help." Noriko remarked, "I remember, Naruto wasn't the easiest baby at first, but that was because I had never taken care of a baby before. Therefore, when he was able to assist in the beginning, it was all new to Kakashi and me. Fortunately, I have something that most new mothers don't." Noriko responded with a cheeky smile and a finger up in front of her, saying, "Kage Bunshin." Jiraiya recalled another intelligent woman once saying the same thing, and Tsunade laughed too. Tsunade advised against using them excessively because the first week after giving birth will leave you feeling very weak. Longer, in my opinion, but you're an Uzumaki. You'll get better quickly. "Speaking of childbirth, have you ever learned what it will be?" Jiraiya inquired. "It's a girl, sensei," Noriko said, smiling as she took Kakashi's hand in her own and said, "We discovered in November. If you went more frequently, you would already be aware of this. Naruto will be devastated because she missed you. Anyway, where is that ball of energy?" Jokingly, Kakashi replied, "She's having a sleepover with Sasuke." "Sasuke Uchiha?" Tsunade raised an eyebrow and said, "I assumed she detested him." "She views him as a bastard, but she doesn't hate him." Noriko shrugged and remarked, "I think it's more to do with Itachi being home that had her so excited to sleep over at Mikoto's. She sees him as a rival and friend, she just doesn't like to admit it." Kakashi rolled his visible eye, which had a hard glint in it, as Noriko giggled softly behind her hand. Even if shinobi were predisposed to develop more quickly than civilian children due to their chosen profession and use of chakra, it didn't mean he believed his little girl was old enough to have a crush on anything. It had to be Noriko's imagination. The idea of his little girl having a crush on anyone was ridiculous. Jiraiya arched an eyebrow and then burst out laughing. "Is there already a crush on that young tomboy? On, of all people, the Uchiha prodigy?" Jiraiya snickered as she asked. "She really does shoot high, don't you think?" Tsunade mumbled, a faint smile on her lips. Kakashi grunted and his eye twitched. "She simply looks up to Itachi. She doesn't have a crush on him. The boy, who is only 10 years old, is already getting ready for the forthcoming Chunin exams. According to what I've heard, the Anbu is considering recruiting him." Noriko scowled slightly but said nothing, forgetting that the massacre had been so near, and that there had been no indication that Fugaku had organized the Uchiha to rebel. At least not yet, and if they were, she hadn't been given access to that information. Not surprisingly, the Uchiha elders were upset with her because she had turned down every marriage proposal from eligible Uchiha men and was now expecting a child with, of all people, Hitaki Kakashi. The majority of people didn't mind Kakashi, but some thought the Sharingan should remain in the clan and denigrated him because he had received it from his deceased teammate. The Uchiha elders had never pressed too hard because they knew how advanced her Sharingan was, as had the traditionalists and those who had learned the same from their elders. Most of the clan wanted to keep her on their good side because they thought she was on a level not reached since Uchiha Madara. She had even more political clout because of her ties to the Yondaime and Namikaze clans, the Red, Chained Death, Uzumaki Kushina, and the Uzumaki clan. "I wouldn't be too surprised if she did, Kakashi," Tsunade said, interrupting Noriko's reverie. Girls mature more quickly than boys, even though she might be 5 or 6 in October. Particularly those undergoing ninja training. She's still young, so it might not be a crush just yet, but you're probably right. Kakashi remained silent, refusing to acknowledge the possibility. Jiraiya asked, sensing that Kakashi's eye would become permanently twitchy, so what are you going to name the new brat? It took us a while to choose actually, Kakashi said, opening with a change of topic. That was accurate. Initially, Kakashi had proposed a way to commemorate one of Nariko's departed future friends, but she had rejected the idea. She wanted something the baby could call her own, so even if she had considered naming the child Sakura or Hinata, the names of her two best female friends, it wouldn't feel right, not just because of the Sakura and Hinata of this timeline. Kushina and Komi joined the list of names that were vetoed because they both had decided against naming her after one of their mothers. She'd finally thought of something special and meaningful, and, she thought, a lovely name. Nariko came up with the name Hitaki Nadeshiko while recalling the original timeline in her visit to the village of Nadeshiko. She had been disguised as a boy at the time because Jiraiya had been teaching her a little about his spy network, and it was simpler to act like a boy while the Akatsuki were still out there. There was a misunderstanding when she was cornered by Shizuka, a Nadeshiko Kunoichi, but after one special henge seal, only she was able to remove the henge. After learning that she had defeated the girl, she promptly requested to be brought to the village so that the situation could be resolved. Upon arriving, she disclosed that she was actually a girl wearing a henge seal that was intended to protect her identity during her 3 years of training and travel, and after everything was resolved, she and Shizuka became close friends. In its own right, Nadeshiko had been a lovely village. The name Nadeshiko would be appropriate to honor two of her close friends, Shizuka and Sakura, as it was also another name for a kind of large pink flower, Dianthus superbus. Furthermore, Nariko always thought the name was lovely. Hitaki Nadeshiko, Nariko replied, smiling softly, we finally decided on Nadeshiko. Konoha the 19th of March, 1 a.m. Nariko snarled, I hate you right now, while clutching the metal bars on the side of the bed she was lying in. Kakashi had appeared shortly after Tsunade and Shizune had escorted her to the designated place where she would give birth. She was already in labor when the Hokage and Jiraiya arrived, but they stood watch outside the protected cave. Tsunade had reassured her that it could have been worse, but she still hadn't anticipated childbirth to be so agonizing, and the weakening of her seal didn't help. Unfortunately, she had spent the last 8 hours in excruciating pain in labor. In retrospect, Madara truly had the good fortune to survive the Fourth War, but it was worse than the time she nearly lost her bowels or broke every bone in her arm, from the tips of her fingers to her shoulder. Kakashi laughed uneasily, but he secretly detested the suffering this was causing Nariko. In order to deliver the baby, Tsunade stood between Nariko's legs and reminded her to keep that seal up, Kakashi. Kakashi nodded and focused on the seal, while Nariko concentrated on the urge to push, and Shizune stood close by, holding a blanket ready to take the baby when it was born.